Good evening. Now for the Committee on General Government, Government Operations and Appropriations now called to order. Today is Wednesday, April 19. The time now is 5:25. In compliance with open government law, the notice for this public hearing were posted on GovGuam Public Notice Portal, KGTF, PBS, Channel 12, and disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets on Tuesday, April 11, and then on Monday, April 17. This oversight hearing is called on the Guam Department of Education to discuss their financial status relative to operations, prior and current obligations, the Guam Department of Education shortfall, federal grants, current and future expenditures and encumbrance, GDOE's American Rescue Plan status, appropriations versus expenditures to date, GDOE's overtime OPA audit report number 23-04. We may not get to that, but we will be discussing relations to overtime. At this time, I ask the members of the GDOE panel to rise and be placed under oath by the Sergeant at Arms. If you anticipate answering questions, please rise. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Mr. Chair, under oath, you may proceed.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. The conduct of this oversight hearing shall be as follows. Please provide my legislative staff with any document for distribution for photocopying. Panel members are asked to remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony as may be desired by members of the committee. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. Personal inference as to the character or the motive of any senator or any individuals testifying is not permitted. Any violation of the general rule of conduct will result in removal from the oversight hearing. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for these proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum will be restricted from participating and will be escorted and removed from the room. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. You will state your name and your title for the record. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined me this evening. I have the Oversight Chair of the Department of Education, Senator Darrell Barnett. We have Senator Dwayne St. Nicholas. We have Senator Jesse Lujan and Senator Tom Fisher. Now I'll give my opening reference to this oversight. Half a day and good evening. With this oversight, GDOE and the 37th Government Legislature will share dialogue on GDOE's financial status. This oversight will provide my colleagues and I with a tool to ensure that we can provide GDOE with the necessary assistance for the success of our island students and our public school institution. With this oversight hearing, we will be covering the different areas of GDOE's finance as follows: operation including prior and current obligation, GDOE's shortfall, federal grants with its current and future expenditures, encumbrance to include the status of the American Rescue Plan, GDOE's appropriation versus expenditure to date, and lastly, GDOE's overtime payment, particularly the OPA, but we'll be asking questions in reference to overtime. Tonight, I look forward to a healthy dialogue and hopefully we'll come to an agreement of how we can better address the issues of our public school institution. My colleagues, in the drive, you'll find under materials the questions that I had given to GDOE early on so that they can make a presentation this evening. And then as they go over all the questions, we'll be able to determine at what point do we need more answers to what's going on at GDOE. And I will allow the superintendent to give her opening. And I know, do you have slides, ma'am?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so are they ready set up?
Yes, we gave it
Okay,
to...
so we'll begin with you,
Okay.
Madam Superintendent.
Buenas and half a day, Senators. I am Dr. Judith Wanpad, the Acting Superintendent for the Department of Education. We're here at your request to respond to questions on expenditures and allocations in the ARP. I'm here with my finance team, Deputy Franklin Cooper Nurse, our Comptroller, Josephine Villanueva, by my two deputies, Mr. Sanchez and Ms. Erica Cruz, and other members of the department. What we would like to present to you, my staff to present to you, are the following: is to give you a summary of our budget. We'd like to also let you know about the year-to-date appropriations versus expenditures, accounts payable, in particular aging reports, the American Rescue Plan, the grant status report, and the American Rescue Plan amendments moving forward. So with that, I would like to ask if the slides are up and to have our deputy, Franklin, to present.
Good afternoon, Senators. We'll go right into the presentation, and what we'll do is, as our superintendent indicated, is we do have a deck of slides here. Initially, I'll be covering our budget appropriations, our
Frank,
request.
Identify yourself.
I'm sorry. I'm Franklin Cooperners. I'm the Acting Deputy of Finance and Administrative Services. My apologies. So with the budget, and we do have the slides loaded up there. If I can ask just to go to the table of contents, next slide, please. So in the presentation, we'll start with the budget summary. I'll briefly go through the request, the GEB resolution, what we submitted, what we received, and our spend plan to get us through the operational period. And then from there, we'll go ahead and have our comptroller give you a snapshot of where we're at in our current financing in terms of appropriation and expenditure in our aging report. And then Dr. Judy will wrap us up with our ARP, and then her plans moving forward in the reprogramming of a lot of those federal funds. Next slide, please. So just to take it all back to where we started in the appropriation year, and what you're seeing in the slide deck is GDOE's fiscal year 22 versus 23 appropriations. So GDOE's fiscal year 23 appropriations total $239 million. This represents a 13% or $27 million overall increase over the FY appropriation levels, FY22 appropriation levels. The $27 million increase is authorized spending included an increase in, the $27 million increase in authorized spending included an increase of $25 million in general fund appropriations, an increase of $1 million in what is now referred to as the Guam Educational Facilities Fund, or GEFF, and an increase of $1.5 million in JFK lease payments. Increases and decreases also occurred to the following revenues. There was a slight increase to the OHS lease payments, a $76,000 decrease in the funding for Public Service Library Resource Fund, a $62,000 decrease in funding for our limited gaming funds, which is for sports facilities, repairs, and constructions. Additionally, if you look at our special revenue funds, that went from $2 million in FY22. It slightly decreased to $1.9 million in fiscal year 23. The special funds for that category was designated for school libraries, GDOE, sports facilities repairs, and it's the same funding level, which includes $891,000 for operations under the Healthy Futures funds. Not included in the presentation in this table is $12.5 million and an additional $450,000. The $12.5 million is what the legislature appropriates for our federal reimbursements for our national school lunch and school breakfast programs. These reimbursements are provided by the USDA's Food and Nutrition Services for meals served to students and children who attend our public schools. And again, we didn't include it as we do get the appropriation in the act. We don't get the allotment or the cash behind that appropriation. The other is the $450,000, which is an appropriation to Guam Community College and the University of Guam, which is for our first generation trust fund initiative. This provides tuition scholarships to GDOE graduates who elect to attend higher education institutions on island. So in the public law, we also had an increase in the general fund appropriations for the following, and these are specific appropriations. We had $1 million provided for the payout of bonuses, rewards, and incentive programs to eligible teachers, school administrators, licensed healthcare professionals, and employees in critical positions under SPED who are employed at GDOE. There was a $3.1 million fund for the payout of employees who are eligible to receive merit bonuses pursuant to Section 6203 of Article 2, Chapter 6, Title 4 of the Guam Code annotated. Additionally, there was $500,000 provided to fund our GDOE employee salary increments and $100,000 for GDOE to purchase menstrual hygiene products for school supplies for GDOE students free of charge. Next slide, please. Although GDOE experienced a $27 million increase in its appropriations from $206.4 million in FY22 to the $232.6 million in FY23, the amount was still $35.7 million less than the department's $268.3 million fiscal year budget request, which did not include the estimated $30 million for the increase of the educator pay plan. And at the time we submitted our budget, we did get the approval later on, so we did have to go back and add in those numbers. Again, on the budget request, we got caught in a timing where that pay plan was approved, our budget was in, it didn't include the $30 million. So again, while the appropriations increased in the year to $232.6 million, this was $53.9 million less than what the Guam Education Board determined to operate current services at the baseline amount of $286.5 million. Therefore, the GEB recognized the urgency to address the projected $53.9 million shortfall and passed Resolution 2022-12, authorizing GDOE's funding level of 232.6, which required immediate austerity measures and budget cuts, including cross-leveling of all staff to reduce personnel, a hiring freeze, freezing detailed appointments, restricting overtime, scaling back and reducing the cost of locally funded programs and activities, reducing the scale and scope of essential contracts and services, reconsideration of school bell schedules to realize cost savings, and further maximizing the reprogramming of federal funding to supplement the needs of students, teachers, and classroom instruction to alleviate the local cash pressures. And requested for the legislature for the intent was to request the legislature for any supplemental appropriations, any supplemental budget appropriations. So again, to address the shortfall, GDOE took the following measures. Number one, we continued to leverage federal funds. For the period, GDOE utilized approved ARP budget to address $7.9 million in contractual services and $16.9 million in utilities previously funded by the local budget. The contracts included custodial, grass cutting, air conditioning, and self-help for facilities and maintenance and supplies and materials. Additionally, we reduced local spending. GDOE's target was to reduce $17.3 million through $17.3 million in costs through a hiring freeze and of locally funded vacant positions, and only allowing the superintendent to fill positions deemed critical, and to continue the cross-leveling of all personnel. Additionally, during the year, GDOE needed to find an additional cost curtailment of $11.7 million in other efforts to ensure that GDOE operates within its current resources. So currently, GDOE is leveraging federal grants to bridge the gap between our baseline operational expenditures versus what the local appropriation levels have been provided. Again, this only temporarily mitigates the effects of the shortage of funding, and therefore, absent the use of ARP, it's imperative that we receive the sufficient funding in order to, at a minimum, maintain our baseline operations, and again, to meet the evolving safety requirements as well as all the mandates set forth in the Every Child is Entitled to an Adequate Education Act. And we do provide monthly, I do want to say that to my left, and she's fairly new, is Josie Villanueva. She's our acting comptroller. Through the year, we work with the EFSC. We're in a partnership, and in the EFSC, there's DOA, there's BMAR, there's OFB, there's OPA. We go through monthly summaries of our local appropriations. They do the examination of our expenditures, and then we have those healthy discussions of the leverage, where we're at in our federal funds, where we're at with our local funds. So with that, I'll throw it to Ms. Josie, and she'll give you a snapshot of where we're at in terms of our local appropriations.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Josie Villanueva. I'm the Controller for the Guam Department of Education. Currently, our year-to-date appropriation versus expenditures, The total appropriation for fiscal year 2023 is 220,116,315.
My apologies, I went through that, and this is the request versus appropriation, and I'll have them forward to the next slide so we can follow along with what Josie's saying. But just real quickly on the request versus appropriation, what you're seeing on your, there they did. And the request versus appropriation, what you're seeing on your screen, is we did want to, again, present that in 23, the budget request was 274. We separated the line item for the CMP meal reimbursement, and then from there, the total provided to GDOE and appropriations was the 232. So, and again, in the board's resolution, it addressed the $53.9 million shortfall, again, through a combination of cost-saving measures and the continuance of going into federal leverage. And then we can go to the next slide.
Okay. Recapping, the total appropriation for the fiscal year 2023 is 220,116,315. The year-to-date allotment release by BBMR is 128,084,049.42, and the only cash received to date is 113,944,874.41, which brings an unpaid per allotment release of 139,175.01. An allotted appropriation is at 92,032,265.58, which gives us an almost 11% of unpaid versus allotment release. Going to the next slide. This shows the accounts payable aging report. As of current date, we have a total of 3,381,365.93 of accounts payable recorded. 90 days and over is 1,678,693.30. I just want to give emphasis on to the 90 days and over. The GOG retirement fund, we are currently communicating with the agency because these are related to interest and penalties, which we would like to request for waiver. The other high value item on the 90 and over is the Sodexo, which is 1,562,179.63, which relates to the local share for our child and nutrition program, which is a local funding. And our 60 to 90 days is 1,048,954.29. 30 to 60 days is 606,746.92. And current is at 46,971.42.
So the questions you had for American Rescue Plans, to let you know that the award date for ARP was on April 8th, 2021, and the expiration date will be September 30th, 2024. The grant priorities for ARP are the safe return of our students and to maximize in-person instructions, that we are to sustain safe operations of our schools. We are to address needs of students to include learning loss, academic needs, social, emotional, and mental health, offer evidence-based summer school, after school, and other extended learning enrichment programs, and support early childhood education. The grant status report is that the total amount for ARP is $286,940,627.01. After deducting what we would give to the private schools and charter schools, what DOE school district then budget for ARP would be $239,427,921. Actual expenditures is $55,087,192.89, and the available budget is $107,659,122.76. Since I came on board in February, what I've requested then for the team to do is to redirect some of these monies under ARP to make available for CIP. Do understand that in the beginning when I gave you the priorities, that's about 20% of the total amount that we receive that must go towards curriculum. The remaining are requests that we would put in to US Ed for some of the different projects that we wanted to do. So the revised CIP budget was at one point like 79 million, and then we had redirected the money, several monies within ARP, and moved them over to ESF and to CG, making available about 114 million for capital improvement projects for the schools. To cite some of those, so you know, there would be the air conditioning, FB Leon Guerrero Middle School renovation, the repairs for the 35 schools, the GW gym, custodial contract, grounds maintenance contract, pest control contract, and a large POs for the self-help projects that our schools are doing, where we provide to them the supplies and materials that they need that they could address by themselves, or the second level would be with the help of our maintenance staff. What we've expended also for ARP is that we have we spent about $2 million for the implementation of evidence-based intervention. To maximize in-person learning was 14 million. To maximize and to pay for the CNP, that is our school lunch program, ARP monies were fronted the money for CNP. Online learning, this was to provide internet for schools when we went online, so that was about $700,000. Then we also paid for power, which was $34 million. We paid for the retention fee, $8 million, and for water, $12 million. So $79.5 million of ARP monies were expended for these district obligations. Yep, I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. You know, I provided you some questions, and I was expecting some answers in specific, not in general. But since you gave me in general, so you gave us a copy of your grant priority areas on the ARP. Can you break that down? How much did you spend to safely return students to and maximize in-person instruction? I was hoping you would put a dollar amount on that.
Yes, I
Where?
did. It's $14,275,250.96.
I'm looking at what you showed up in slides. Do you have a copy we can get?
No, these are just my notes so that I can.
Then, Madam Superintendent, you've been here before. Okay, so we don't need to debate that. Whatever you got, we want to see what you spent on safely return students to and maximize in-person instruction, because right now, in the past few months, all we've been talking about is that you haven't done anything to the schools. I'm not referring to you, but DOE has it, okay?
I'll give you one
Okay.
extra copy that I have here.
You have not sustained safe operation of schools. I don't know what the dollar amount is. Canopies are not done. I've been up to the schools with Ms. Gutierrez. No canopies. This is way before you came on board, ma'am. Address needs of students to include learning loss, academic needs, social, emotional. I can go down the line on all the grant priority. And there's nothing showing that. So whatever you've written on a piece of note right there, Madam Superintendent?
I think they're
It
making.
didn't answer the questions, and if you want, I can go over every question I asked you. Okay? I was trying to help you out so that you could give us information, Josie. What expenditure allocation have you utilized with FY 2023 lump sum appropriation? As of February, that you have expended 125 million based on your FSD report presented in the EFSC meeting. Is that correct?
Say again, Senator, I'm sorry.
Josie, I'm talking to you. You're the comptroller. Don't worry, Frank. I'll get to you.
Senator San Agustin, the expenditures for FY 2023 lump sum appropriation, we spent 82,779,728 for the salaries, benefits 32,045,966.
Give me a total. Give me a total.
Total is 119,044,365.
Okay. I have here, based on the report of your EFSC meeting, reference document, GDOE's financial status designated report, you spent 125. I think whatever the report is, I'm getting this report from OFB that actually attends your meetings. Okay, so I know their numbers can be wrong because you all speak the same numbers. Okay, so my recommendation is you sit down and make sure when you guys have your meeting, you guys are all communicating across the board. Next one. You have outstanding prior year obligations. Do you have any outstanding prior year obligations? Not your 30, 60, 90. What is the total? I got a two-page list of questions I'm going to ask you every one because you guys didn't present it. I was hoping you guys would present it.
Senator, I can take that and just.
You can answer that?
Yes, I can. So currently, right now, our outstanding prior year obligations are over $1 million, and a big portion of that is for Sodexo. Right now, we're looking at that number to slightly increase during the current period as soon as we make and update our posting, and that should bring that number up by $2 million. So it's going to be increasing. Prior years at $1 million, current year unposted is a little bit higher than $1 million, about $2 million.
That's prior year. That's before the fiscal year started, is
Correct.
what you're saying.
Correct.
Very good. What is your current shortfall, your deficit? In the EFSC meeting, GDOE reported a 15 million shortfall in personnel. However, the bottom line shows a lapse of 17.9 million. I'm reading what I get from the report, from your EFSC meetings.
Sure. Yeah, and on that, and if you look at that, I believe that category is classified under salaries and wages and benefits. So what happens is in the EFSD, they do a financial status designation. You're familiar with that, Senator. On the financial status designation, they give a watch, a warning, and it triggers a corrective action. So what it's triggering right there, and if the tool is going to work properly, it's a spreadsheet that forecasts on current monthly expenditures, forecasted to the remaining of the period. So right now, with the budget load, it's projecting that we will hit a $50 million shortfall in our payroll. So what that means and how that tool is, you have to understand that tool. That tool is subject to how the budget load is and is subject to anomalies in an expenditure. Meaning to say, if I load a object class category in salaries of this amount, power, water of this amount, what you're going to see right now is the department A stable in other categories. How the department has been managing with its current cash flow is to use the stability in the other accounts to try to smooth out the expenditure levels from the downfall projected in the shortfall in payroll. So the tool it's very helpful. It triggers an action that goes straight to the board. The board requires us to go back to the figures, work with the FSC, and then from there, and there's a lot that goes into that equation, but from there, if we can, and you know that the superintendent has authority to move from object class to object class. So from there, if we're able to re-up on the appropriation and reallocate funding towards personnel, we can stabilize that watch and warning. Is the $15 million an actual shortfall currently? No, that's a projected shortfall by the end of the year. And if we do not take any action in there currently, that's something that, again, we're staring down the barrel if we don't take action.
I'm trying to understand that you're identifying that it could be a shortfall if you're going to go after it. When you don't
It's-
have any money, you're never going to get a shortfall.
It's identifying a shortfall if there is not, again, it's a cost category with a fixed budget amount. The expenditures are divided into operational period. If we're trending higher on the expenditure per period against that original budget amount, it's going to show a negative. So right now, as we receive cash, as we receive reimbursements, there's an ability for us, and as we leverage, there's an ability for us, if there's any stabilization in the other accounts, there's ability for us, again, to make sure that we address any shortfalls.
All right.
But yes, it is a tool, it is projecting a shortfall. I do recognize that and understand that.
Okay. How have you been paying for power currently? I understand the superintendent said 34 million went to utilities. I just want to make sure that we clearly understand, Superintendent and Josie, because you're new. Frank's been there a while, and so has Ms. Gutierrez and Mr. Sanchez.
I will answer your question, yes.
But at the budget, when we discussed the budget, power, utilities were always addressed.
Correct.
Okay, let's start, that's one. When we give you a lump sum, my question now would be to the board member. Did DOE administration come back to the board when they got a lump sum check? Remember, this is what they asked for, this is what you approve. When they get a lump sum check and they're saying this is how much they're going to get, did they come back to you, to the board, to adjust where the money is going to be spent? Because if they didn't, then they had a blank check with a lump sum, and I just need to know where the board was standing on that one.
I'm going to tell the truth, okay? When they got the lump sum, the board set the spending priorities, okay? And that should be what is followed. Whether they follow it or not, as you know, Mr. Chair, that that's operational. But yeah, so where they put the money, where they spend the money, that's up to the superintendent, and it's not during Dr. Wampat or Francis Santos, okay? So yes, it came, and we did a spending priorities.
Correct.
Some of them are not happy because we delete some of the things that are not important, but that's the truth, nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. But I just wanted to make it clear that, number one, when the board approved the budget and it goes before the legislature, when they get a revised budget, it's got to come back to the board for their approval.
That's when we did
And then
the
we
spending
will be able to
priorities.
track them, okay? And if
Correct.
you gave them a set of priorities and they didn't follow it, then there's something wrong there.
Yeah, just to add to that process, Senator. So in the budget process, we work with all our schools. The school surveys its stakeholders. There's a mandatory requirement to get input. From there, it goes into our budget team at my level with the superintendent to collect all that information, get it to the board. The board has a work session. We go through the numbers. We go through every line item in the schools. Then from there, they package it up, and you know that it's the board's submission. Once we do get the appropriation, we go back to the board to do what's called the spend plan and the management plan for that year. They pass a resolution, as I read, to make sure that we're not in a deficit balance. So if we do operationally say this is our baseline, and we understand that we're looking down a projected shortfall in a shortage of operational cost of 30 million, the board has to take corrective actions. And I read from there, cross-leveling, reduction of staff. Recently, they cut all new positions. So yes, there is that process. Ms. G is a part of that process, and so is Dr. Okada this year. They do sit on our finance committee. They make sure that there is a management and operational plan from there. And that's what you see on the EFSC, is based on the appropriation levels, we have to divvy that up into object class. What can we do to provide adequate funding for personnel, for salaries and benefits, for critical contracts, for utilities? All of that is based on what's provided. We go to that, and then that sets the year for funding levels.
Okay.
I
I know that we do get a lump sum, but how we manage and how we operate is still by object class.
Okay.
Senator?
Yes,
Can
ma'am.
I because Mr. Kupner's mentioned about cross-leveling, the board have been asking for a master schedule cross-leveling because we know We want to know how many really do we have as teachers vacancy. Taza. Those that are task taza. We never got that. So we are still waiting, and I told Dr. Wampat, we would like to see in her report cross-leveling, classroom size, because we know that there are areas that, are we really short on teachers or something is wrong? So Dr. Wampat was the former chair of education, and when she was there, she really makes sure that master schedule goes to her, and that's from where she was assigned, see whether it was the cross-leveling, but thoughts are cross-leveling up to now. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair. When you mentioned operation versus just policy, I think I'll work that with your oversight chair so we can look at that, because the board hires and fires the superintendent. And if it needs to bring the board back onto the level of operation, then so be it. Moving along, ARP funds. DOE, do you send a list to US DOE to tell them how you're going to spend ARP funds? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So when we gave you your budget, and it included utilities, but you chose to use ARP funds, who approves that? The US DOE?
Yes.
And they approved it, right?
Yes, they did.
Okay, so we won't have to worry about you guys asking for money for that then.
It's
It's not a
approved.
shortfall.
It's-
See, it's not a shortfall, Frank, because number one, it's in the budget. If you chose to use another fund, that's on you,
I
not on
agree.
us.
So, Senator, if I can just, again, when we come down here, and I don't want to say when the Senate and when the legislation and the senators provided us a budget, it provided us a lump sum. Did they carve out that it wasn't funding utilities? The answer is no. Manager, again, going back to the operational level, we're given with a shortage, and I think that shortage this year was about 50 million. So we have to take that into our operations and saying, okay, and the board did say we have to go back to federal leverage. We already had approved in our budget and through USAID the approval of utilities. We had that approved in the prior year. It was something that we continued, and we had to go back to ask. Because we had success in getting it approved in the prior year, and it's a large critical contract, a large expenditure of GDOE, the strategy was to go back to it. Do we have it for the upcoming budget? You know that the grants are running out, and we only ask for it for the certain period. Okay. So yes, the idea that the legislature shorted us on utilities, that's not true. The management made a decision as to which areas because of the shortfall should we go and leverage, and that was one of the strategies that was taken into consideration.
All right, I'll work with your oversight. Maybe we'll consider a line item budget for you guys then this year. And then we can figure it out where your true shortfall is at. Okay? I'd be careful just what you may be asking. You may not be asking for, but I know the superintendent's looking at me like, oh, God.
I know, and we have to examine that conversation, because and we've had this conversation, and depending on whether I'm the acting deputy or I'm your chief auditor, it's going to be a very, probably a different answer on how I would approach that. Correct. But what I would say, again, as I said, is we are given a lump sum budget. The superintendent has a unique ability in transfer authority to cover any operational shortfalls, to push money from line item to line item. But we don't operate operationally during the year on a lump sum budget where we're just pulling from one account. We do load that, and you can see that in the FSC by object class category. So what I would say is, if we are considering that discussion again from a line item budget, it's critical that it's fully funded. Because the minute that we start the year, and remember, our school year is different from a budget year. Our school year starts, it's summertime, we're starting school, we're waiting for that fiscal year end we're halfway in. But when we start our budget period, my fixed costs are, my personnel and my fixed costs are there. I can't take back what personnel costs are. You know what I mean? I can't take back what we have operationally from power, water. We can do some going green measures and try to save, but if my payroll, and I can show you payroll, is fixed, the minute that line item is not appropriated to that level, you're telling us that two things will happen is, it's either you're going to cut employees or you're going to cut employees' hours, which is a very different conversation. So again, right. I do appreciate that conversation, and happy to discuss how we can make that work.
We'll be discussing it.
Okay.
Moving along, how many vacancies do you have currently? Because as of FY 2023's proposed staff pattern, it showed 419 vacant positions. Is that true or no?
I want to get you it's,
Remember, I provided these questions?
yeah,
okay,
so
it should be an
the
easy
exact
answer.
number, let me get the schedule, sorry. I have it. So let me pull that schedule. So what it was is our vacancies is under 200. So those are the true vacancies. There's new positions that were upwards of 300 that we already took off. So we're looking at vacancies under 200.
Please be reminded, if you have vacancies that are over 2 years old, get rid of it. You must not need it because you never funded it.
Agree.
Madam Vice Chair?
Senator, when the FY24 budget came to the Budget and Finance Committee, which Dr. Okada and I are the committee members, there are still vacancies, but then they're requesting for brand new position, like program coordinators are vacant, position FY23. Then they're asking for more program coordinators in FY24. So Dr. Okada and we work with Mr. Kupener, we delete all new positions. So if anyone is that requested for new position, so sorry. There's nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the federal grant sides, what are all the federal grants you have received and are utilizing to date? And what are the administrative costs for these grants? That's why I send you the questions so you can give us specific answers. Every federal grant you applied for. Because what's the total amount of federal grants value? 50 million? 45? Josie, what is the total? You're the comptroller. Tell me what it is.
Come again, Senator.
What's the total value of the federal grants that DOE has applied for and have received?
We have
Total. Give me the bottom line.
the total overall is 491,799,197. That's the total.
490,000?
491 million.
491 million.
Million, sorry.
Ooh, more than anybody else's budget. Now look, Senator Fisher's looking at me and smiling like, wow. And you know what? That's why I gave you the question, because we wanted to know each grant, because we want to know how is the grants that you applied for impacting DOE schools and students. We're very concerned about that, because when everybody starts turning around and starts saying, where are we at? What are we doing? Please answer the questions I provided to you. And you don't have to answer it now, but be ready, because your oversight chair is eager to know. 400 million?
For the American Rescue Plan, we have a total of 239,427,000. The total expenditures is 58,041,907 as of this date.
Okay, how much has been awarded for the Education Stabilization Fund allocation for outlying areas, ESF1? I know the answer is 41 million. Am I correct? Or is it more or less?
There is a 110.
No, the
ESF1, I believe you're right, Senator. Right now, that is expired and closed out, so we're looking at the ESF2.
Yep, 110.
numbers.
ESF
Yes,
210,
correct.
yes.
So,
Okay. And the reason why, when I ask you the questions about the grants, you need to give us when is the start, when's the end. Because when you say 400 million, it's not just for 1 year. It's probably for 2 years or 3 years or 4 years. You have to break it down so we can understand what you receive. And then what I wanted to know was how much did you identify? You know, when you apply for grants, you identify administrative costs, right? And it's incorporated in the grant, correct? Like if you applied for a $10 million grant, how much that is normally the administrative cost you would receive? Just give a rough estimate, Josie. Simple numbers. Use 10 million as a guide. What would you use?
5 to 8%.
5 to 8%.
Yes.
5 to 8% is what? $5 million? No.
The total lot.
It's about 5 million, right? And where's that money being used? Because I haven't heard of any federal grant administrative costs being used for DOE and any of the schools. Administrative costs. I'm not talking about overtime. I'm not talking about traveling. And I'm not going to call them junket trips when they bring everybody in the federal grants branch. But I'm just concerned because maybe what the oversight chair's been seeing could have been cleaned up before he got elected. And then the rats wouldn't be there. Most of the stuff should have been gone because who paid for all the new furniture in your new building? Is that the administrative cost? While the school didn't have new furniture? I'm curious, Frank. Can you answer that?
So in the new building, you're referring to Tizen?
Tizan,
Yeah,
the
so
new DOE headquarters?
generally, all the divisions were stocked with collateral equipment that came with the lease. So I think a certain division that you're asking did have funding available to get furniture.
How do they, when you say they had funding, what funding are you referring to?
You're referring to the
Administrative
same
costs?
fund, you already know, yes, it's the administrative cost.
Who authorizes and approves where administrative costs is spent? Because I know it goes back to, hopefully, the superintendent's office.
Correct.
Okay, so it's the superintendent before you,
It's,
Madam Superintendent, so.
I would think it's both. Yeah, so there's, again, and we are on high risk, right? So you're looking at the divisions that operate and whoever's the administrator of that specific division, plus the superintendent. And then in order to have access to those funds, you're working with a third party.
Okay. I'm not going to ask about the OPA on the overtime, but I'm going to ask a general question. Trying to avoid the OPA report. Were any federal funds used for overtime? Yes or no? I'm not referring to OPA, so don't use that. You cannot answer. You can answer, was any federal funds used?
Correct, yes.
Yes, okay. Next one. What are the restrictions on who can generate or incur overtime? Was the governor's order 2020-08 applied? The policy says that certain positions cannot.
Yes.
It was applied?
So
Probably not, huh?
if,
Don't relate to OPA, just ask.
no. So the first question, was federal grants allowed to be used for overtime? Yes. The way that we drew down those funds was anyone that was eligible and in line with the local statutes. Your next question was, did we follow? Yes, there was a split. So there was a executive order. We did have some of that differential pay that was paid out. And again, we did use the federal grants for that.
Okay, are there any overtime payments still pending?
Yes.
There is still?
Yes.
You have pending overtime?
Pending payments of overtime? plan?
overtime.
Yes.
How long? How old?
I don't know. They're not booked in the system since again, before the audit came out that kind of exposed where we're at in those payments. Internally, we had stopped. So there was still some overtime being in process, and that's unrecorded. That needs to be, it's still an outstanding item.
Okay. I'd ask the Oversight Chair of Education. I'd like to also recognize Senator Paris has joined us this evening. Senator Barnett, I know you have loaded questions, so go for it. All yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. It's a lot of numbers. I just want to know what situation would you guys be in if we shorted you as much as, well, if you were shorted as much as you were shorted last year in the upcoming fiscal year? How would that affect your operations, considering that there's a lot of things you have to comply with, right? We just passed a bill, Bill 29, which is now Public Law 37-4, so I'm just not sure if I'm comfortable with this narrative that there's a whole bunch of money and you guys are being frivolous with it. So if you don't mind, Mr. Frank?
No, sure. So again, Senator, and we do have a meeting in the upcoming weeks where we'll trace the budget. And during that meeting, I like to show you our fixed costs. When I say fixed costs, we're going to go baseline, and baseline normally includes warm bodies. I'm going to show you, we have 3,600 employees, what that impact in terms of raising EDU, what that impacts on the GPP. I'll show you what my biweekly payroll cost is versus DOA's cash release Additionally, in order for me to run and operate the school system, there are critical contracts. We do a very, very conservative estimate. I believe it's about 2.5% on escalation of power costs. We apply that for the budget period. So we will line up our personnel, our critical contracts, our direct student support, everything we need to successfully operate. And that's we'll go with the original request and a baseline versus the additives of new positions, like our board vice chair just said. The board takes first swipe at it and they start to scrub where we can clean it up. But again, to go back to the line item budgeting, if we're short somehow, we're not revenue generating. We don't close our doors to anyone. We are in a very vulnerable position that funding is critical to not only comply with our baseline operations, but there is that 14 points, and we apply to that as well. So yes, broken ACs, broken canopies, custodial contracts, those in good faith have to have funding available for us to go out to bid to get. So anything short, you saw recently with Senator Blah's memo on the certification, anything short of full funding, we don't have a good faith effort to contract. So line me up, I'll show you the warm body costs, I'll give you the staffing pattern, I'll show you the estimates from historical costs on power, water, utilities, phone, internet, and then we'll go into that discussion on where's the baseline actually for the department, what's all the additives, here's the critical balance that we need to make sure we take care of baseline operations. And when I say baseline, I mean warm bodies, critical contracts, power, water, utilities, basic internet, custodial grasskeeping, correct. And yeah, any shortage of that, my certification office, our procurement can't start. And we get challenged with, okay, we can't continue contracts, we can't do that. We can't do that unless there's adequate funding behind it. So that's very critical that we get our funding. And again, we will have that conversation in 2 weeks where we trace that.
Did you guys receive the $20 million that we were able to get passed and the governor signed into law?
No, and we're hopeful that we get it, so it will be helpful.
Can you keep me posted on that?
Will do.
Have you also, I'm going to go back a little bit here. Have you completed payments for all the pandemic work that was done? Because I did have a note here from 8 SRO members who worked a 12-hour shift 6 days a week, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And this is stretching back to March 20th to April 4th. They're alleging that they have timesheets to show for it and that they were not paid.
Oh, if it's a homeland security, generally what happens is we have an agreement where we work with them, we pull up shifts, we turn in our timesheets, and it's a separate funding source. So that wouldn't come out of our, is it the homeland security budget? Yeah, so that wouldn't generally come out of our appropriations. We work with them for the funding and those payments.
And could you just go over again because I know when we had our education emergency session, there was some waffling about whether or not the ARP funds would be enough for the capital improvement projects. And I know that the additional $20 million was supposed to shore up some of the things like the playgrounds, right? Bringing those up to compliance. So I guess just yes or no, and if you could provide detail, do we have enough money for all of the projects? And also to come into compliance with Public Law 37-4 when we consider the ARP funds and the additional $20 million that you have not received yet?
So we'll take that. Okay. You want to go ahead?
What we did is when we redirected some of these monies over to ESF2 and Consolidated Grant, we were able to increase the amount that we would need for CIP. And the list that I gave you earlier are inclusive of that dollar amount. So currently, yes, we would be able to use the ARP monies that we have redirected and reserved for CIP. And IFBs have already gone out. The ones that I've mentioned to you have gone out, and they are at a level of pre-publication. Some of them were just awarded, yesterday. I can't give you the dollar amount, but we're definitely moving as quickly as we can, and the Attorney General's office have actually been working very closely with us to sign off on these IFBs.
Are you able to share any information? I was able to learn that was there a meeting with US DOE relative to any extension for spending of federal funds that you attended?
You're right, we did. We sent a letter in March. We have yet to meet with them. We requested to meet with them, as a matter of fact, this past Tuesday, but they needed some time to review it. So hopefully soon we'll be able to hear from them.
Are you able to discuss the nature of the meeting, or what type of information are you trying to learn?
Oh, no, basically what it is with USAID was just to let them know that we've redirected these monies and they were going to be used for specific, activities.
Are you still counting on ARP to pay utilities next year?
Oh, well, no, not for next year because it expires next year.
Right.
But we did include it with actually, the amount that I mentioned was just for power, 34 million, and for water, 12 million.
I think I'm good for now, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Senator Tom, do you have any questions you'd like to pose? And if it's to bring anybody else up, we have to swear them in. Okay. Thank you.
I did have a question. I guess this would go to Mr. Cooper Nurse. I'm looking at the this original handout. I don't know how to identify it. It's called the Guam Department of Education handout. It's the one we began with. Okay, and this is just as an explanation. On your GDOE fiscal year 23 request versus appropriations, it says that the fiscal year 2023 GDOE appropriations total was $232,620,315. Is that correct?
Correct. Are you seeing a different number? I can explain why.
Yeah, and so you're ahead of me. And then on the next page.
If you go to the previous slide, I'm sorry. Yeah, if you go to the previous slide, what that did was our baseline, and I try to simplify this. So if you look at that slide, you're looking at the appropriation at 232. If you look at the previous slide, where it says FY 22 and 23, where it covers the OHS expansion lease, JFK lease agreement, TGen lease agreement, what happens is those appropriations are not provided to GDOE. We act as a pass-through. Those go to pay those lease schools. Okay, so we record that on our books, but we don't handle the funds. Similarly, for the first generation trust fund, there's an appropriation that goes to GDOE. It's an established trust, but that money goes to GCC and UOG, and then the minute a student chooses to enroll in their campus, we get that reimbursement.
Okay, so the appropriation, according to you, of Public Law 36-107 of $220,116,315, does not reflect those dollars which were...
It doesn't. It takes out, this is the direct cash. That does not take the pass-through appropriations. That takes into consideration the appropriations that comes with a cash release from DOA.
Okay, all right. Now so on the year-to-date appropriation versus expenditure, when we say 220.1 million, just to be clear, that does not reflect dollars that were programmed to a third party directly?
That does not reflect dollars that do not come into our accounts as available cash for operations. That is what we're using for operations, correct.
But some of those dollars that went elsewhere, did GDOE benefit in any way from those dollars?
Absolutely. So again, those are for our lease schools. We just don't do that because it doesn't go against what we're tracking in our EFSC. We do acknowledge it. I put it in the previous slide. Those were the costs, those were the increase, but that goes straight to the lease agreement.
Okay, so if somebody's asked me, what was 2023 GDOE appropriation under Public Law 36-107, the correct answer would be $230,620,000.
Sure.
Okay, and what has happened on the second page is, I don't want to say it's an accounting Well, I'm not real sure what it is, but here's my fundamental question. If we take the 220.1 million, to understand how much money went into your checking account, essentially, would we also add the federal ARP money to that?
Separate, so local and federal, yeah. So this is local, and this goes to fund our local operations. The ARP, again, we're on a third party, currently is managed with our third-party fiduciary agent.
Okay.
So in order to have access to those funds, we work with them.
Who's the third-party managing agent?
They're managing the grant funds, and they're managing the grant funds, all US Ed grant funds.
Okay. The ARP money that came to you, which was what, 200 and change?
Yes.
Okay. The 200 and change, is that ARP money to be expended for the mission of the Guam Department of Education?
Sure, in line with the initiatives that the superintendent read prior to going into her figures.
Okay, then I'll just characterize that completely inaccurately, but you get where I'm going, as almost a line of credit with the federal government of around 200 and some million, ma'am?
Senator, clarification, 220 million is coming from our local appropriation, and that is being released by Department of Administration. But as far as the federal funding is concerned, we have a drawdown request, and it's not sitting currently on the GDOE bank account. It's by drawdown, meaning to say we have all these details through the third-party fiduciary.
Okay, so if you can justify the expenditure, the feds will say, here's your money,
Yes.
right? Okay. All right, because assuming that you can identify the appropriate expenditures for that federal money, I mean, it looks like GDOE is fat with cash.
That is not the case. Sorry,
I'm sorry.
Senator, that is not the case, because what's happening is that this federal funding is very specific. It's very detailed and categorized. If you are not congruent with those categories like supplies, equipments that is detailed on the grant, you're not going to be able to get a reimbursement. If you want to do a reprogramming of that funds, then you will have to request, and that's what our acting superintendent had done, and our acting deputy.
Okay, but I'll just wrap it up. But I mean, if you guys had all your ducks in a row, you would have the 220 million that the Guam taxpayers gave you, and assuming you had slotted those additional 200 million into appropriate GDOE things, I'm sorry, it still looks like you guys are fat with cash. But anyway, I'm sorry, but Mr. Chair, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Before I ask Senator Lujan to answer his questions, simple question. Did the superintendent submit the waiver of the MOE to USDOE last year and the year before and every year we ask? Yes or no?
I believe there was 1 year where he did. I have to go back to the records, and the other ones, one wasn't necessary. But I believe there was 1 year where he actually did.
Okay, and I'm hoping that you guys are asking for it for this year also coming up.
We're working on those numbers to make sure that that's accurate to get to US.
Okay,
Correct.
thank you. Senator Lujan, if you have any questions, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the Office of Public Accountability forward, please. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us this evening. I just want to put on the record for the People's House your findings, not going beyond the findings, but just could you reiterate to the people of Guam and to this House the findings, the illegalities, or your perceived illegalities that the OPA had put out in its report, just to put it on our record, not to go beyond, again, your findings, because we know it's under investigation, but just to reiterate the findings?
My eyes are not that good. I'll have my...
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you and good evening, Senators.
Thank you.
My name is Vincent Duenas. I am the Supervising Accountability...
Were you sworn in?
Yes, I was.
Good, thank you.
Yes. We stood up, yeah.
Yes, yes. I saw BJ, but
like,
I did...
BJ tapped
yeah.
me, he's like, hey, can you stand up too, and I get sworn in. But yeah, so my name is Vince Duenas. I am the Supervising Accountability Auditor with the Office of Public Accountability. And just to go over a brief summary, and just to let you know that we did give briefings to certain senators, so they were aware of this before the audit was issued. But so basically, we uncovered significant internal control deficiencies with regards to overtime payments that were awarded to employees at the Guam Department of Education. And what we did was we looked at a certain time frame in which these overtime payments were made. So we took it from starting from March 20th, and then we ended our scope September 2022. These deficiencies that we identified, it led to overtime payments that were made to ineligible employees, and it raised serious concerns about the approval processes and OT payments at DOE.
When you say ineligible employees, what does that
Sure.
mean? What makes a person, what
Okay.
makes the employee eligible versus illegible?
Sure, I can go over that, and that's actually one of the.
Okay.
So we basically had 5 bullet points in
Okay,
our
okay.
audit, and that was one of them. So when I say ineligible employees, that means that there's a list that was a part of, and we also put it part of the record in our audit report. There's a list that comes from DOA that allows or does not allow certain employees in the government of Guam. And if you look at what we actually put the actual list, it's several pages long, and it lists various positions in the government of Guam that are ineligible from receiving overtime and compensatory time off, CTO. So what we did as part of our report was we actually looked at the positions that were paid these overtimes over at DOE, and we compared it against the list that was provided, or that was part of the record, I guess. GDOE is very well aware of this list because they actually through a previous acting superintendent had received the advisory from DOA, and through that, in turn, turned it over to GDOE employees and said, here's, the exemption list, so you're not, for all of the positions here at GDOE. So that was one of the findings that we had. The first one that we had also was that certain employees that they were incurring overtime hours almost a year prior to actually any plans or receiving any approval from the overtime that was actually worked. So there were I guess banking hours during the pandemic and I guess holding it and until the time came when it was actually made. Yes.
Just so it's clear, Senator, for overtime, employees or supervisors there's a standard operating procedure. If you're going to have employees get overtime, you should go to your superintendent before the first hour that these people start to accumulate overtime. And you have to present to your director or your superintendent your plan, saying, in order to be able to do certain things, I'm going to need these employees to do extra hours. And you need to inform somebody up higher than you before you start banking hours. And what we found was that there was almost 1 year of no presentation to the superintendent of the fact that they were accumulating hours. Let me just make it clear. From March 2020 to April of 2021, employees were accumulating hours, but they had not gone to the superintendent for clearance and for approval of them accumulating hours. Someone came to the superintendent in April of 2021 and said, we need to get your approval for overtime hours, and this is our plan. That plan was not approved until September, but they had been accumulating hours for, by this time, about 17 months, and then when the superintendent finally approved it, they cut the request and the checks.
Okay, and continuing on, there was also an actual disparity in overtime payments that were made between essential workers and administrative support. And in saying that, and there was a question that the Senator Agustin asked earlier about the differential pay. They actually did have a differential pay policy that was created through executive order. And what we identified were, like certain employees were allowed to get that. And these are the ones where like the the social workers that were helping with public health, the nurses that were helping with the hospital. And they were only allowed, or they were allowed, and in terms of getting compensated for that, with either 10%, 15%, or 25% that was allowed through the executive order, versus these employees who were, in the other side, getting the 1.5% or 1.5 times their pay. So,
And again, to reiterate what the public auditor has said was there was no approval granted, right?
Right.
Okay.
Then the last thing, and this was brought to the previous superintendent's attention, I want to say in 2020, and we did actually put a memo, the actual memo that was written by certain certifying officers that felt that their positions or their jobs was actually being overtaken by the Federal Programs Administrator in this case, where they were the actual certifying officers for any funds that that needed to be certified. What we found.
So the supervisor was a certifying officer as well. You say?
No, I'm saying that there were certifying officers.
Okay.
Within GDOE who are appointed by the superintendent.
Okay.
So this is an actual you're actually appointed, and it goes through the Department of Administration to show that these are our people that, when funds are to be certified, these are the authorized certified signatories to say that their funds are available.
Got it,
and
got it.
when we actually interviewed several of these individuals and previous certifying officers, they actually brought to light that they actually notified the previous superintendent that, our jobs are actually we're being taken out of the process. How that happened, we actually pointed it out too in our report that there were certain requests made through to the third party fiduciary, and we identified that as a potential area where there was, that's where that potential thing, that's where it occurred, where they took the certifying officers out of the approval processes. So we included that in the audit report. Just also to note that there was an audit finding in this.
But on a normal situation, the certifying officer would need to be the one to do the certification, but they skirted the certifying officer?
Exactly, yes. And like I said, the certifying officers actually did come forward to the previous superintendent saying, and they had recitations of law, their SOPs saying, this is what's happening, and I'll let GDOE address that if why.
No, I mean, it's under investigation, so I'm just,
sorry?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and just to also add on, in one of the overtime plans that BJ was talking about that eventually came, there was actually blocks, right? Certain blocks. There are 5 different blocks for signatures to be included in what we identified, and I guess one of the most important plans was that one individual signed on 4 out of the 5 blocks.
Same individual.
The same
signed
individual
4?
holding the yes.
And there's supposed to be 5 different signatories.
Correct.
Ache.
One for the certifying officer, one for certifying that the funds are following federal compliance, one for requesting, one for approving, and then the last one was the superintendent.
Okay. Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So just to also add, this is the crux or the genesis of this audit actually came from several different areas. Certain employees actually, in one case, an employee was inadvertently sent an email to, saying, oh, could you please, here's our overtime request, and in turn that employee submitted it as a hotline tip to the internal audit division or internal audit office at GDOE. So that's when it peaked. Antennas went up, and what's going on here? Because to be honest, and this is a question that you asked earlier about overtime, it's a rare occurrence to have overtime over at GDOE, because of the list of all the positions that are actually exempt. And then to add to that. In the single audit, which is an audit done by the external auditors, in this case it was Deloitte & Touche, they actually had an audit finding that basically just looked at a couple of, in audit we don't test everything.
Sure.
We just take a few samples, and in this case they identified, they just took 3 payroll expenditures and they tested it to see for compliance and stuff, and they actually did question $17,000 in overtime costs just in that small sample. And the analogy that the public auditor uses, there's like a little string here in your pocket, and they just they just looked at it, and then what had happened through the course of this investigative audit and also all of that, they just kept pulling the string. We kept pulling the string, and then lo and behold, the pocket fell out, and that's where we're at with this particular audit. I think that's basically
I think that's enough for if they're listening tonight for them to lawyer up. Yes, sir.
For the senators that were here this morning,
I'm sorry?
a few of you were here this morning. 4 of you actually have been with us since 8 o'clock this morning. There's one thing that I want to underscore. All of you, your eyes got about this big when they said they received $491 million from the in federal funds. This morning I explained to you guys, it is imperative. If you ask them how many accountants they have, I'm afraid what the answer is going to be. Because they've been losing people. They've only had this CFO only recently. It is imperative that this legislature please try to find a way to make the salaries for everybody that's in accounting or in auditing, that there's some parity. Because this morning we were discussing the fact that people were leaving revenue tax because DOA was paying more. And some of them are moving to us because we pay more. And we're losing people to GWA, GPA, and PAG, and GIA because they pay more. And in the new plan that Mr. Burns put out, he has a provision that he's going to have this market premium pay where he tries to find parity between all the agencies and the private sector. It is imperative that you guys support that plan because they're handling, as you hear, 400 million, actually 491 million, plus the 230 million that they get. So it's a huge sum of money, but they need people in their accounting and their auditing division to make sure that the money is being spent properly. Please, I make that plea. Not just, I'm not asking just for me. I keep pointing out, there are other people that have to handle a lot of money, and they really need help.
That being said, because you mentioned you mentioned that in the context of the findings, are you then equating the findings or the, I guess, illegalities to maybe the shortage of accountants?
Not necessarily, but they've lost their audit staff. But their audit staff was the first one that was onto this and was looking at the risk that was involved.
Okay.
And so they need to have a good audit staff, and it's, Mr. Cooperners is a really bright young man, and he's moved up, and unfortunately the audit office is now sitting in need of assistance. But there needs to be others that come in behind him to properly staff the audit office to make sure these things don't happen.
No, and I understand, and I think
and also to make sure that people listen when they say the certifying officer is being sidetracked. Someone has to stop it.
Absolutely, and again, that being said, I of course there's an active investigation. But when we're hearing that of the 5 individuals that should be signing off, and 4 of those signatories are from one person, again, an active investigation is going on. But I would say there was an intent to skirt some procedures here. But that being said, again, we understand the shortfalls of DOE in areas such as this, but I just wanted to make sure that this particular situation was not necessarily attributed to the shortcomings of that division, because according to the findings or whatever is put out and what the OPA has put out or put on the record is that yeah, there was intent. Or it seems like there's intent to skirt the law, and any I'm not a lawyer, but Attorney Fisher is. So anyway, that being said, again, it's under investigation, but yeah. but thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lawton. Senator Paris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening to everyone. So I was looking at one of the reports that you provided. It's the federal program inventory. So I was looking and see that there wasn't going to be any repeats for a big portion of that. I guess for the listening audience, can you estimate what we will not get in 2024 as far as federal funding? So if you look at column, I believe it's 2023, a huge chunk of that is not going to be available.
It would be ESF 1, 2, and ARP.
Yeah, there's also other ones, CNP State Administration Expense, TFAP. So there's a bunch of others that don't recur on the final column for 2024.
But the ones I mentioned are the ones specifically related to COVID. So there is that specific expiration date.
Yeah, so I'm trying to calculate really quickly. It looks like maybe like 300 million might not be available. Or at least I don't see any recurring amount being provided by the federal government.
Yes, because the American Rescue Plan is 286 million, and then for SCA it would be, ESF would be $110 million. So
Yeah.
we definitely would not be seeing that
Right.
next year.
So yeah, basically what I'm trying to point out is that you're going to see a reduced funding federally.
Yes, we will.
And in regards to the local funding, from my understanding, a lot of that's just to, it provides mostly personnel costs, is that correct? As well as utilities.
Yes, so what we do, we get a lump sum, and as stated earlier, is that the priorities that were set would be for personnel, critical contracts, such as custodial and grounds maintenance, and utilities.
And CIP?
No,
No, CIP is not included in
it's
budget.
not included.
Historically. I know it was tried before, and it got cut out when it came time to the final budget. So, as you know, we passed public law to require GDOE to be compliant with the new regulations for sanitation of schools. Can you reiterate what is the cost to GDOE to being compliant by this school year, this upcoming school year? Have you identified the cost?
Let me check.
Cost for full compliance for any inspections?
If we're going to consider all the CIP projects that we're currently, that we're going to be doing, and if any one of those are part of the inspection, then we can honestly say that you're right, our schools would not be able to pass.
So yeah, the question was the cost. So what is the estimated cost?
I don't,
Have
it'd be
you
over $100,000, $1 million, over $100 million.
over $100 million to comply,
Yes.
roughly? Okay. But as you
But then in addition, and that's just for CIP, but then now Now with the playground and then ADA, then that's a totally separate dollar amount that we've not anticipated.
Okay. In regards to the pay increases, so the last year's budget, if you can reiterate, did it cover teacher pay increases?
For ARP monies?
Just teacher pay increases, how was that funded last fiscal year?
We used ARP monies.
And for this coming budget, where is the source of money going to come from for
No, then
teacher?
for teachers, those were done already, teachers and counselors. What you recently passed with the 20%, that will be, I guess, local.
So it would have to come out of the local budget,
Yes.
in addition to the continuing payment of teacher pay increases?
Then that will be based on the new fiscal year, what the budget would be. That would be personnel, and that would be the top priority.
So that would be shifted over to the local
Yes.
budget? Okay. And so basically, the status quo budget is not sufficient?
No.
Okay. The other thing is debt service. Has a payment increased for debt service?
Which debt service, Senator? I'm sorry.
So there's leases, right? Several
Oh,
leases. I guess.
I believe so. And again, the debt service is we're the beneficiary of the lease agreement. We have the schools. We get to benefit from the services, the facilities, the upkeep, the maintenance. But in terms of the appropriation and management of those funds, that we're a pass-through. That's handled through DOA and the governor's office.
So is it going to increase? Because I know in some of these
It's-
leases, there's balloon payments, right?
Yeah, I've been looking at the just the annualized cost and the appropriation level, so it's slightly increasing.
Okay, it's a slight increase.
Yeah,
Was
slightly
this
increasing.
Was this anticipated?
I don't know. I can go back to the agreement and check, but based on just the appropriation levels and analyzing what those numbers look like, understanding that it's included in our appropriations, there has been some slight increases. I don't know what those factors were, if it was stipulated in the agreement, but I'll go back and check.
Yeah, because I know in some of these agreements, there's balloon payments, right? We reduce costs one year to kind of tie us over for during lean times,
Yeah.
sacrificing the later payments. So I don't know if that's the case for some of these.
Yeah, and then in our current operations, and I can give you a good example, FB's move to Okadu, there is going to be some increased costs because of the additional services that are required and upkeep for the school. So if there's something that triggers additional cost, then we can go back and examine that, but that's usually the case. I don't know if there's an escalation on the maintenance and the support for the lease agreement. I can go back and look into those figures. I've been tracking it, and right now it's not a significant increase to the lease agreements, but there are some numbers there that are increasing over the years.
And then I think it was asked earlier, but utilities, what is the inflation rate for that at this
In
point?
terms of what we do is we take last year's historic costs, and generally from a budget perspective, we increase that to 1% under 3. It's about 2.5, just to get us into figures, which is, again, being very conservative. I think power and the cost of power has gone up past that. So historic costs averaged at 12 months, give us the total cost, annualize that, and give us an increase to 2.5 to 3%.
Okay. And then as far as inflation in general, what is the estimate? Have you looked at other districts and see what the inflation rate has been to the cost of operations?
I haven't done a study of other districts' inflation costs relative to school operations, but I have analyzed our budget and our baseline. So again, like you mentioned in your previous comments, we're closely watching any increases to payroll. We're closely watching our staffing levels. We are also monitoring the reduction of any of our grants, the leveraging of those grants. So there is a very good understanding of, again, we're limited in revenues, the revenues that we get both locally and federally. So while I haven't analyzed inflation in other school districts, I do thoroughly look at our current revenue base.
Okay, and I know in the past, so in the recent years, the TEF has been underperforming. What is the impact to the GDOE if it were to drop?
Luckily, we've been and thankful to DOA for us, the realization of that cash receipts relative to the TEF. In years past, it's been more, I guess, erratic, and we've seen a drop in those. So what is the impact? Again, that will impact our support for direct critical contracts. Our general fund appropriations goes primarily to personnel. We use the TEF, and that TEF comes in through property taxes later on in the year. We start realizing an increase in tax cash release, I want to say around March. And from there, you see our AP and our utilities in years past balloon up to where we're waiting on cash relief from so there is some vulnerability to cash collections relative to TEF. How that impacts the department is going to be tied to how we utilize that funds, which is, again, tied to our critical contracts.
Okay, also a question about the accounts payable. So, why is it that we are not paying vendors on time? So there's 30, 60, 60, 90, 90 days over. What is the reason for the delayed payment?
Good evening, Senator Sabina. It's coming from the local funding, and again, because it's obvious that our cash appropriation received is short by 16 million. So that really is, we're doing the prioritization of payments as far as accounts payable aging. In fact, we are actually pulling through all the payables and the invoices that needs to be reflected as of a current date, and we are still on that process.
So currently in your presentation, it's roughly 3.3 million. So it's all based on the cash allotment? Why is it?
So basically, majority of that 3.8 million is local funding. Just for example, the Sodexo, we're talking about a 900, out of that 1 million plus thousand that is reflected on the accounts payable aging, 900,000 of that is related to local funding or the monthly match of 500,000. So if we are not receiving the cash appropriation enough, then we have to really schedule the payments of that, or stagger the payment as cash is available.
So is this directly related to TEF, or is this general fund money?
Some of this are coming from the general fund, but if as far as the payroll is concerned alone, with the benefits versus what is cash received, we are basically falling short.
Okay.
Cash-wise.
Okay.
Correct, Senator. And as Josie said, I just reiterate, any shortages in cash release, any non-realized revenues from cash release versus what is appropriated will affect our cash. You'll see it two ways. You'll see it in that report that our senator just mentioned that will project the shortfall in our payroll, or you'll see it in the opposite where vendors aren't paid on time. One of the things I do want to mention tonight in terms of vulnerabilities to cash, and I don't know if this body is aware that when we were placed on high risk, one of the significant things that really infringed on our cash management was that in a biweekly payroll, local funds support payroll, and we're looking at reimbursements for any funding under U.S. Ed. Meaning to say the cash release that DOA provides, which is entirely by this body for local appropriations, goes into paying payroll for federal employees, and then from there we have to work with a third party to get a reimbursement. So the timing of that reimbursement and the cash release schedule, any gap, any miss, it leaves us in a bad position in terms of exposure to cash flow and being vulnerable to vendor payments or missing payroll.
Yeah, thank you. It just brought back memories of payless paydays. Yeah, I thank you for responding to the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair or Vice Chair.
Thank you, Senator Paris, for your very thorough questioning. The chair had to step out for a second, but I was given the green light to go ahead and proceed with my questions. I wanted to ask the OPA some questions just relative to the audit with tippy toe all around the whole. It's under investigation by GDOE. But I wanted to ask, there was a document that you included in the audit, and it was the one that you were referencing earlier, Mr. Vince, relative to the I call it the whistleblower letter, right? And this is a letter in which how many certifying officers signed on to
In
this
this
thing?
case, three.
Three certifying officers had written management and informed them basically.
We're being sidetracked. Our jobs are being overtaken by someone else.
Right. Is it your opinion that had that letter been heeded, that we could have avoided this whole mess?
Absolutely. Yes.
It was frustrating to read that because we should be encouraging people to blow the whistle, right, and to inform their supervisors or whoever, the OPA, of any potential mismanagement or misuse of federal funds.
Yes. Yes.
BJ?
Yes, and just to follow up on the question of the previous senator, because it's reimbursable, DOE is now short $640,000 because they can't get reimbursed for that amount. Or they decided not to try to get reimbursed. And so that's shorting them. Just so you know that was one of the other findings we found.
Right. Can you, Vince, can you just provide a little context on the timing of when this occurred? What were other GDOE employees doing at the time that this?
Well, so going back to this all started, I guess, around March of 2020. That's when the pandemic was declared, or the national emergency in the pandemic. And of course, as you know, basically all the government employees or the non-essential employees were told stay home. And then I do recall around shortly after that, they did have a lot of GDOE employees who were we calling the essential employees that had to go into work, right? They had the nurses that had to go help with the hospital, right? All those that can, all hands on deck, right? You had social workers who were helping with the contact tracing. You had principals and certain staff at the schools doing the grab and go. Those employees around, and then a couple of, I think about April or May of 2020, that's when the governor created the differential pay policy. And so those employees at the time were availing of that. So our office actually did an audit that we released in February of 2021 dealing with COVID differential pay and just showing the disparities too then with, you'll notice, or back then, there was some controversy about who was getting the double pay. When there's a declaration of emergency declaration, certain factors had to be met, and that's why we did that audit. It was later on, like BJ was saying, it was in April of 2021. That's when employees within the Federal Programs Division, and there were other certain divisions that were banking their hours, right? That's when it was starting, and so they were at, it wasn't until September of 2021 when the actual overtime plan was presented to the previous superintendent. And then within a couple of weeks after that plan being approved, a couple of weeks later, that's when there were and this is where the difference is, where they have demand run payments, meaning checks were cut, manually versus getting directly deposited into your bank accounts. And that's what, it was kind of like fast-tracked, right? That whole getting everybody paid out for that. So that's where it was at.
So you mean to say while this nonsense was going on, they were banking the hours, essential employees were standing and giving out food and exposing themselves to the COVID-19 virus?
And they were actually receiving the differential pay. Those employees that I was talking about,
yeah.
They were receiving the differential pay, which is from what we saw, was 15%, and then some of them, the nurses, were receiving the 25% because they were actually at the hospital and the skilled nursing, wherever they were all located. Versus the employees in this, which was the subject of this audit, they were receiving overtime, which is 1.5 times their regular pay. And that's why we pointed out in the report there's this disparity of the compensation for basically the COVID response, right? That's what it was.
And
But
the other
the-
thing
go ahead,
that we also pointed out in the audit was the fact that some of these people were getting exorbitant numbers of overtime hours. In order to receive the amount of overtime that some of them claimed, they would have had been working 30 additional hours a week for months on end.
Right.
And one employee, yeah, I forget how the breakdown, but they were just getting huge numbers. They had to be working like 70 or 60 to 80 hours a week.
60 to 80 hours a day, almost seems like, right? Yeah. But I want to say the checks, the check and balance of, employees who knew better, who saw what was going on, who had, even gone as far as writing a letter, right, and affixing their name to a letter. So what were you able to find out in the audit relative to that letter? And what happened after?
After the
Letter was sent?
After the letter was sent, Frank mentioned what they actually did. Frank, what did the superintendent did something where he actually changed it around. Okay, I'll go back to this. It was actually the internal audit office actually did a risk assessment based on that. If you recall how I was talking about that hotline concern that was submitted to them, and of course also with the report, the single audit report that was issued. So they actually did a risk assessment and presented in May 2022 that risk assessment to the previous superintendent. I think from then, that's when he made some adjustments to the certifying officers, and he took that, gave it back to them.
Right, yeah. I would just say, on the record here in the, what do you call it, Senator Lujan, the People's House? Yeah, on the record in the People's House, I just encourage government employees to keep blowing the whistle. Keep blowing it. If you write a letter to someone and they don't do anything, write another letter. Call up the public auditor. What's your number?
47 audit.
47 audit.
AUD.
That's 47 AUDIT.
Right, 4728348.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to ask GDOE just a few on and I know that we kind of covered this in maybe one of the first meetings or roundtables, but the number of employees hired with the ARP funds, did you have a number?
Senator, I don't have that schedule, but we can provide that information. I don't have that with me.
You have a ballpark, Mr. Frank? Is it under 100? Is it 100? I heard it was about 100 or more.
It might be. I have to go back again, and we can give you the categories of what that is.
May I respond to that? I think
Yes.
because it's in our audit report.
Oh, wow, look at you.
It's
Mr. Vince.
286.9 million.
How many?
286.9 million in American Rescue Plan, and it was awarded in March 2021.
Right, yeah.
He's asking for the
I mean, how
staffing
many,
rates.
do you have, how many employees were hired with ARP funds?
Oh no, I don't.
You sure?
I thought not that one.
Okay.
I didn't hear that.
I'm sorry, we didn't bring the numbers, but I think it's important really to understand who these employees are.
Who are they?
Yeah, because they are, not so much who are they, but they are community program aides, teacher assistants, and other support staff.
Yeah. I want to say, Frank, you provided me with a breakdown of this. and that-
Senator,
and-
I just got from my staff saying it's less than 200. So yeah,
Less
our
than 200?
Yes, less than 200, and the superintendent just did read out what those positions were.
And so these are program coordinators?
Yes, community program aides.
I see.
And teacher assistants and other support staff. These
What is-
are
what-
more of these employees are out at the schools.
Right, and I saw that, because you had provided me the breakdown, and I saw that how the employees were distributed to the schools. You'd have, two at one at there, but what do they do? What does a community program aide do?
Joe, maybe Joe?
Hi, Joe Sanchez, Deputy Superintendent.
Hi, Joe.
Hi. So the community program aides were actually a direct request from the schools because teacher assistants, by virtue of their job description, have to be servicing teachers and they have to be working with instructional support and things like that. The community program aides were direct result of COVID, so they helped with supervision. They were able to help in the office, so if they had contact tracing at the time that was necessary, they were able to help with that. They helped with outreach. So a lot of times the schools were not able to do calling and supporting families for outreach. So basically, the teacher assistants helped with instruction. They helped with covering classes, anything that has to do with students and their academics. Community program aides help with generally operations.
Is this a position that's been around in the Department of Education, or was it something that was created?
Actually, it is. It's a position under our social work program, so they assist our social workers for outreach activities.
And
So we piggybacked off of that existing position.
were these employees, the almost 200 employees, hired competitively, or were they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so we actually have positions under the consolidated grant and I believe some local positions. So they were hired the same way as any employee would be hired.
Okay, so it was you fill out an application, you compete for the job. So
Yes.
if we're going to dedicate the ARP funds for the CIP, what's going to happen to these almost 200 employees that we're currently paying with the ARP funds?
So currently, we actually have vacant positions under our other projects, for example, our consolidated grant. And I'm not sure if we have any more local positions because they just had interviews for those. But we're encouraging all of them to apply. Not, as you can imagine, not all of them are going to be recommended by their principal. In fact, under the consolidated grant, that's the process for rehiring every year because they're limited term employees. Every year they have to quote unquote get reprocessed.
Yeah.
That if they're recommended by their principal, we would just take them up again. And if they're not hired by their principal, we give them like one chance. We move them to another school, but then if they're not recommended again, we don't pick them up again.
So are these?
But we're recommending that they move over to a different funding source.
Right. So are you talking about the vacant positions that you're going to try and move them over to? Are these the 200 some positions that Mr. Frank had mentioned earlier? Or are these
no,
separate?
those are the existing 200 positions that they're in right now. So because the ARP funds are going to be closing out, we're encouraging all of them to apply for either the other grant or a local position, and then they'll go to the competitive
And so
process to be picked up.
if they do migrate over to these other positions, would they be paid out of local or federal funds?
Depending if they get hired.
So this is an additional anticipated cost that
We're
we
not
might be
asking-
looking at?
It's not really new positions. These are existing positions that are vacant.
And then, do you have like a total cost for these employees?
We do, but I would have to pull that out from Frank. But I think for the consolidated grant, yeah, it's a little over $6 million. Yeah, so we have teacher assistants that have vacant. We're about 300 teacher assistant positions. We have about 60 vacancies. So
Let me ask you, because we had the special education roundtable, and there was a lot of discussion about a shortage of one-to-one aides. Now, when we talk about, what's more important here, what is more important here? These 200 or almost 200 employees that we follow with ARP that do things like make phone calls or help the social workers, or the one-to-one aides? Is this a situation, in your opinion, that it's an either or do we really need everybody?
no, so actually they're all entry-level positions. So what we encourage the CPAs to do, because again, we're closing out that function, because you're right, we don't need the contract tracing anymore. It does help with supervision, like schools will always enjoy that.
So what do they do now, though, if they're not contact tracing?
Oh, they're still helping with supervision. So they help the schools with supervision, they help in the office, so any assistance that the school needs operationally, they're able to do that. Also, we have shortages of substitute teachers, so they're able to help with subs whenever a teacher's out or something like that. So they're definitely helping with operations.
And
But
so
the intent is we still want to close that out and get them to apply for a more permanent position.
And so the thinking is that you're going to move these almost 200 employees funded by ARP to other positions, not necessarily the same positions, but one-to-one aides and those other shortages that you're trying to fill these shortages that we keep hearing about?
And the good thing about that is because these employees have been there for over a year now, the schools know who they are. So in terms of their recommendation, the principal's recommendation is very strong when it comes to either picking them up at the school or picking them up somewhere else. They would actually give them a recommendation. And those who don't get a recommendation most likely won't get picked up. Other things that we do with them, we've found that this actually becomes a very good pool of employees that we can train for entry-level positions. So we have a lot of teacher assistants over the years who have become AOs, they've become administrative assistants, clerks, upper-level school aides, and other positions like that. So yeah, that's our intent, is to continue to use that process to get a better pool of individuals at entry level.
Okay, because yeah, there was a lot of discussion about the short, I'm still getting emails and texts about no one-to-one aides.
We're encouraging them to apply for all the positions that are open. And as you know, I did hear about I did watch the hearing on the SPED, and Tom did articulate that one of the challenges with the one-to-one aides is the inconsistency of their position, and you know, that the school aides, a lot of times they move over from a one-to-one aide position to a school aide position or another.
Right. Is it possible that
position
we
that's
could maybe
equal.
get creative, and instead of just trying to hire back all these over 200 people that, you know, we don't hire, you know, 50 of them, and then instead we hire interpreters or other positions that, you know, arguably could be more needed than...
Yeah, well, these are existing positions, so if they were to be converted or something, that would be fine, but
So
we're
you're
not
saying
asking for
they're
new
critical?
positions.
Each one of these ARP hires is critical to the operation of the school, is more critical than an
Not
interpreter?
the ARP, that's why we're trying to move them out of ARP
Right.
into other positions in
So
the
I'm just
DOE
saying,
that would be
instead of
applicable.
moving everybody, okay, everybody, let's go over here now. We're going to pay you with this money. Why don't we say, oh, some of you come over here, the rest of you, see ya. We need to hire some interpreters, or we need to hire some, you know, one-to-one aides.
Yes, I'm agreeing with you. So
Okay.
the point is, we're trying to get them out of ARP because I think we set a deadline of at the end of the fiscal year
Yes, I've
to close out those
already,
positions.
I've already instructed, of course, the deputies that because these are only temporary positions and they would end at the end of the funding, that to let them know, and that whatever vacancies we have, and then we're going to have a job fair on April the 21st, is to encourage them now to start applying for any of those positions that we have vacant. And,
Thank you.
and he's correct, because these individuals have already been working at the schools need the one-to-one aides, they need regular school aides, and other positions in the school. So these individuals then, who have already been tested, so to speak, and can be evaluated by the principals and may want to, you know, hire them. I've been signing a lot of personnel actions for even school aides, but I've also, that we hired, but I've also at the same time signed off again for those who have resigned. So it's a number that's constantly, you know, changing. They're not permanent positions. We've hired one-to-one aides, the para-educators. I remembered I interviewed this one girl. I mean, not to be interviewed for a job, but I saw her at the office and I asked her, you know, who she was and what she was doing, and she's getting, you know, trained on the job one day and quit the next day. So it's very, you know, difficult, of course, to keep some of these entry-level employees.
Right. Ma'am, could I just ask, because from what you just said, it almost sounds like these employees are going to have dibs on whatever jobs are going to be available at this job fair. Is that accurate, or should we encourage everybody, you know?
Because Norm, it is competitive. So what it is that when there is a job announcement, everybody would apply. Then they'll be interviewed by the different principals. So it's not just only that particular principal who's going to select that individual. It could be other school principals who would do that. But we just don't have the pool either. And in this particular case, there is that pool that we could then, you know, have them apply for the jobs. But it doesn't mean that it's a sure thing that they are going to fill those vacant positions.
Oh.
They would have to compete for it.
And can I just clarify, one of those operational functions is functioning as a one-to-one aide. So all of those vacancies that you have as one-to-one aides, the school is still responsible for providing an aide, as in an individual, to be with the student, even though there isn't a hired one-to-one aides. So CPAs are allowed to be one-to-one aides, just like the school aides are. So those are some of the operational type things that we're talking about.
Thank you. I did want to ask, with the playgrounds, right? So I know we just had the hearing the other day. If we're counting, how much in federal funds again? Just for all the projects, it's 100 million, it's 130 million?
For CIP?
CIP and,
Oh, but those, I mean, for the CIP, those have already been earmarked for the 35 schools and other schools like FB and the
Right.
gym. Definitely those have been already earmarked. For the, what we were looking at for the playground and ADA would be the 20 million that has been appropriated
Right.
to use some of that.
that you haven't got yet. We're gonna get, Lester, I know Lester, half of Mungie, 20 million? No, Miss Judy, with the ADA compliance, because it sounds like, and I know that we have mentioned this in the SPED hearing, is the intent of the Guam Department of Education to, when they're doing their assessments and starting the projects for compliance with the safety and sanitation regulations and compliance with Public Law 37-4, is the intent of GDOE to, as they go, address ADA compliance issues?
Well, I asked that question, as a matter of fact, of our F&M staff, and there are going to be definitely some compliance to ADA. Like, for example, we said we were going to change all the doors, so meaning then, of course, the threshold and the doors themselves would definitely be ADA, compliant, because that's all basically that are being sold now. It's no longer the smaller doors. So that most definitely. Then in some places, they're saying there's the ramps that we have in some of the schools that we would look at because of the canopies that are going to be installed in some of those in those schools, but not all. And I know the bill did require for a certified accessibility expert, and I've been asking around, so I asked our safety officer, and he doesn't know, he's not, qualified to do that.
Yeah.
I've asked an engineer, and so they're going to hopefully get back to me and tell me who's available to be able to do this. But I just want to also let you know that in spite of the fact that, yes, maybe not all of our schools are ADA compliant, that all of our school principals are very sensitive, to these children with a disability. So there's such a thing as, providing or accommodating the individual. So that means, like, for example, if a child was bound in a wheelchair or a walker or a crutches, the classes then for that student will all be on the first level. And, counseling office, first level, nurse's office, first level, and things of that nature.
Are the newer schools ADA compliant?
I'm sorry?
The newer schools, like the JFKs and the Ukadus?
Those, yeah, the newer schools are. Yeah, it's the old school by law, basically, and any facility, is that they would be grandfathered. However,
yeah.
when you start to renovate, and depending, I don't know what the percentage of the renovation would be, that then would require that they, would start to be ADA compliant.
Yes, Ms. Maria?
Thank you, Senator, because, I was at Jim Guerrero, actually, to check the playground equipment, because there, I hear there's so much money in Head Start. You go to Malesso Martyrs School, they have the playground equipment from the 1900s. So I went there, and I asked the principal again. I said, by the way, I'm here for the playground, but did they ever address that ramp to go into that classroom for the student? And she said, no. I said, let me take you, Mrs. G, to the special ed classroom. I sent you the picture. Senators that were here for the round table of spec. The parent that was here about the wheelchair of his son for how many years. I invite you to go to James Guerrero tomorrow, because there's a student there. For over a year, the principal has been asking for a wheelchair. The parent even have to buy something so that their child can be placed there. There's no RAM up to now. And it really hurts me because so I asked, and I showed a picture to Dr. Wampat. I thought that the next day after the round table here, somebody will go there and do something. Lord and behold, they're going to a conference, 2 weeks. That's the problem, okay? Special education and Head Start are going to continue to get DOE cited, and I won't blame them if they sue the department. You brought up the canopy, the access, the ramp at James Guerrero. The principal has been asking for the wheelchair. Oh my goodness. Oh, the numbers were not getting right. We're going to ask the procurement office to do the order, and we will air freight. You know how much the air freight is going to cost? Pretty soon the school's going to be over. There's 2 kids, and I don't know how many more are not going to have a wheelchair. I asked the principal, and the teacher that was there at James Guerrero, has the assistant superintendent for special ed ever visited your school? They said no. So I even asked the principal, I said, I'll find someone to make you a RAM. Because I feel sorry for the schooling to be pushing the student there. Okay. Senator Lujan, because my 2 neighbors here, I love their report. Let me tell you, okay? And I know you're going to ask, do the board know about it? No. I went on my surgery in 2021, and when I came back, I was asking for this person. I said, where is she? Where is she? I said, oh, she resigned. And Lord and behold, I found out that she was removed as the certifying officer. So if you look at the OPA report, Appendix 3, it's right there, all the guidelines that she put in. 2016, when John Fernandez was on administrative leave, there was a listing of all positions that are not are exempt from overtime. I saw that. Because we don't know, is we had a board staff, and when we have our meeting before, it's not 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, somewhere later, and Senators and Augustin will know. But she's not entitled to overtime. When the U.S. Ed came last year, because I already heard about that OT, I asked, I share my concern that there's only one position title in the government of Guam. And I worked at Civil Service Commission. I was one of those that assisted in developing the position description. How could an AO, an administrative officer at a school, is not eligible to earn overtime, but downtown, they can earn overtime? And I share that with the U.S. Ed, that morale, because they come to me, Mrs. G, how come they get to earn overtime and not us? I brought it to the superintendent. I said, there's disparate treatment in this department. Yes, it's operational. But, when people come to me, I'm elected, I'm not appointed. I have to answer to them. And I brought that up to the U.S. Ed when they came. After that, I saw these mutual faces at me downtown because I bring up overtime. What about the school? Okay, what about those at the school that they are there from 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning to get the school ready? They're not entitled to overtime. So there is unfairness. But if you ask me, yes, it's true. I was so surprised. Where is that certifying officer? And she's been good. She's been really helping the department. And she's an honest person. So, when you're on overtime, I was telling Dr. Wampat, because I was down there. I was sitting in my car before 4 o'clock. 3 of these people that got the overtime are leaving already. I'm like, oh, wow. What time does the governor of Guam DOE gets off? I did. I was there. I usually sit in my car just to monitor.
Yeah.
That's okay. They might be listening, but I messaged the chair, said, take pictures. Said, too bad somebody distracted me. I didn't take the picture. So it's true. If you ask whether the board knows, no. We were not aware of that because they say that's operational. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. G. Thank you. I just did have one last set of questions for the OPA relative to the auditor pay plan. I know there's no auditor pay plan, right? But you have been talking about trying to boost up these auditors and these accountants and these financial types. But do you have like a ballpark figure, like a percentage? Are we talking like a 22% or less, more? Just so we can, have an idea what we're working with.
Yes, Senator. So based on the update to the governor's or the general pay plan, as part of that transmittal that Mr. Byrne had given to the governor, which she approved, in there were certain recommendations that were made. One of them was the creation of a market premium policy or an MPP that was mentioned earlier today.
Yeah.
With that, I do believe DOA plans to, or already has a draft of that policy. And in that policy, they, at least from what they've told me, the Personnel Services Administrator, that certain positions within the entirety of the government of Guam.
Give me some examples, Mr. Vince.
Biologists,
Okay.
accountants, auditors. I think there were some, I'm not sure what those were the examples that they gave me, that they will be put into this premium pay policy, and there will be different tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. They didn't give me any more specifics, but they said it's going to be percentages of whatever they're, in addition to the 22%. So if they move from whatever their pay is plus 1.22, then it'll be added again another 15, 10, 15, whatever percentage. We'll have to ask DOA what their plans are or when they plan to issue that. And I do know that it is in everyone that is affected by that is in the general pay plan.
Okay, so we should be checking our email.
Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Frank, did you have anything to add?
I just wanted to note, and I want to thank the OPA for being here and the public auditor for his support. And he's publicly supported not only our accountants, but specifically our auditors. I am an auditor, right? I'm in the acting deputy of finance position, but my position is chief auditor of the Department of Education. In terms of costing, and we've looked at this and we've worked with the OPA, we internally lost almost 50% of the staff with me being gone. They're absent a chief. So the
I'm sorry, to who did you lose them to?
Oh,
We got one. We got one.
So OPA is sitting here complaining about people getting poached and they're poaching people.
I do want to say that she's an OPA staff. I'm an OPA staff as well. She's trained. She's very professional. She's a very good auditor. I'm happy that she continues in the profession. Whether we're internal at GDOE or whether you're at OPA, it's the same GAGIS standards, it's the same purpose, it's the same audit reports. Internally, we did ask for parity for GDOE. We're working with our HR unit right now. What we've estimated for our staff, for auditors, and we're going to do the accountants as well, and we're working with DOA on that because I know they have some plans. But internally, just for the audit staff, it's less than $30,000 to implement, and then from there, that's slotting similar to be competitive. We're the lowest paid auditors in government. That's slotting to be competitive, not to the autonomous agencies. We'll lose them every day to an autonomous agency pay plan, but at least competitive to line agencies such as DOA and OPA. And then from there, it's about under 30,000. And we're still, it's critical. Absent right now, we're working with USAID on transition plans. One of the things that is implied or one of the necessary measures is US Ed is placing, again, internal audit in front of validation and review absent the third party. So if you really want to address your high risk, right now your medium and your independent auditors are doing the reviews of those federal grants and federal funds.
Right, and I mean, I have to say, you guys have been working hard to get us out of that high-risk status, so thank you.
Correct, and to the question is in the support, as our public auditor said, in the inventory of federal grants and the inclusion of our local funds,
Right.
At a point in time when we still had ESF 1 and 2 active, we were upwards of about $750 million that we were managing. And I want to be very specific. I was detailed. We lost our superintendent. I lost my controller. We lost our senior certifying officers. It's a very vulnerable time. We've worked past those situations. We're slowly staffing. We hired a very qualified comptroller. We do need that support. And moving forward, for us to be successful, we are in probation. We have to make sure that we are properly managing all funds.
Well, I'm very glad that Senator San Augustine is here listening to your concerns.
Yeah.
But just one last thing, Soup, on the special ed. I know you attended the SPED hearing, but just to kind of piggyback off of what Mrs. G had said, I have also been getting, because I asked those people who are waiting for the wheelchairs to keep me posted, and they haven't really heard anything from, and I know it's only been a little bit from the SPED hearing, but I was hoping that would light a fire. So if you could just, follow up and maybe lick Mr. Rabata's ears to get things moving just a little bit faster for our SPED stakeholders, I'd appreciate that.
I will.
Thank you.
Senator, when I heard that, I did say that I was going to follow up with it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead, Senator Ron.
questioning,
Go ahead.
I don't want the frame of thought to get lost, but that, Mr. Governor, you said your previous position is you're the chief auditor for DOE, right? Okay. Now let me ask this in generalities again. The findings from the OPA, okay? Findings from the OPA. Was that finding as well? Was that generated by the third-party fiduciary?
Not at all. That was first identified, and I believe OPA just commented. It was a hotline tip. It was a risk assessment. Internal audit brought it to the superintendent, brought it to Deloitte, and worked with auditors. Auditors work with auditors.
Okay, so, I mean, you guys dealt with that. I mean, is that what I'm hearing? I mean,
Internally,
internally?
we had to identify the risk, yes.
Okay, now let me ask this. What does, since they didn't find this, what did this now do? We're trying to get off the third-party fiduciary, right? What does this hinder the getting off? Are you in touch on a daily basis or something with US DOE in regards to this situation?
Absolutely. So in terms of communication with US Ed, and I have to say that I'm almost a year removed from my chief auditor position, but there was a biweekly call set up specifically to work with internal audit, to do financial monitoring, to do risk assessments, to make sure that, again, compliance is in order, working both with the DFAS and working with federal programs, working with the third party. There was a full reporting mechanism to US Ed. What does it do is very hard to determine right now. We are in a transition. We did bring this to US Ed early on. They do have a program office that provided guidance. And then on the risk management side, they work with our internal auditors to make sure that, again, any issues are properly identified, brought to their attention. Is US Ed aware of the audit? Were they aware of the risk assessments early on? Yes, they were.
Okay.
We've tried to follow the auditor's assessments and recommendations, and internally we took action. And I think the superintendent can be happy that we did submit a transition plan that does identify and improve our internal controls.
Yeah.
So again, it places a heavy emphasis in the next 6 months that we do financial management properly. We follow the SOPs. We're aware of all these laws that are in front of us, and then we're managing these federal funds accordingly.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate again. So I mean, it doesn't come back to bite us. That it was through a tip, and then you guys internally had found this and did the reporting and things of that nature, right?
Correct. There was originally, again, it goes to whistleblowers. There's whistleblowers. There was people visiting the office. There was concern brought to the right officials. That got looked at. There was a risk assessment done, brought to top management.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Ron. No, just real simple statement. I'm happy you identified that you lost an auditor to OPA, because the last time I picked up OPA folks at OFB, so hold on to her for a little bit, okay, BJ? Then we'll talk later. But I'd like to also recognize my other colleagues that have joined us this evening, Senator Frank Blas and Senator Roy Kanata. And ask Senator Roy, do you have any questions?
Unfortunately, my colleagues already exhausted the agenda, so I don't have any questions. I just want to give a shout out to the panel for coming out again. You guys' continuous collaboration is needed, and we need to figure out how to fix these problems. Again, shout out to my oversight though, Speaker BJ and Vince. I know you guys have been all day literally in our hole, and again, thank you guys for all your hard work. Let's just figure out how to fix this and carry on, right? Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Frank Blas, do you have any questions before I go to Senator Tom Fisher?
Tom, you want to? Go first. Yeah.
Okay, go for it, Tom.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am concerned about criminal activity at the Department of Education. In particular, I'm concerned about criminal activity at the Federal Programs Division. I would suggest, Ms. Gutierrez, that we might have been able to purchase those wheelchairs or perhaps put up a canopy if the federal program director had not taken $80,000 in overtime for which he was not entitled. So with that, I'd thank the Office of Public Accountability for their report. I've read it 3 times so far, and it's endlessly fascinating. Referring to that, as I understand it, in the report, and that's on page 9, $640,055 in overtime payment was subject to reimbursement, should have been subject to reimbursement, but, and this is from a criminal point of view, this is very important. The Federal Programs Division decided not to make a claim for the $640,000 and 55.
No, I'm sorry. I'm just looking at your page.
$640,000 plus. They decided not to ask for reimbursement of that because of the improprieties in awarding the $640,055. Do I misunderstand that?
It was not the Federal Programs Office.
Okay,
Who decided not to ask for it. Okay, it was the director's, the acting director at the time.
And who was the acting director at the time? Do you have any idea? Would it have been John Fernandez, for example? Mr. Coupeners?
So in the process, again,
do you know who the acting director was at the time?
Let me explain the process. So in the process, we go through reimbursements, and the reason...
Sir, at the time this occurred, do you know who the acting director was?
Senator Fisher, I just would like to remind you that GDOE had said at the onset of the hearing that this matter was under investigation, so
yes, I understand.
I know you're a lawyer, but if you could just tread carefully.
Well, I understand that it's a matter under investigation, but these are matters of public record, and this under investigation exception just doesn't exist in the law anyway. So, sir,
I can answer the question.
Who was the acting director at the time?
You mean the superintendent?
Acting superintendent?
It's the former superintendent.
And his name is?
Is John Fernandez.
Do you know who an individual by the name of Ike Santos is?
Do I know an individual?
Who is that person?
He's our federal programs administrator.
Okay, the federal programs administrator. Do you know whether or not this gentleman is still on island?
I don't know that.
Do you know whether or not Mr. Fernandez is still on island?
Yeah, I believe he's not, but I don't know that for certain.
You believe he's left island? And not subject to process, of course. But anyway, going back to the OPA, you, sir, I guess it was the administrator's office, or the supervisor, the superintendent, the $640,000, some of that money was mine, some of that money was yours, was spent on inappropriate overtime, and we could have recovered it had it been appropriate, but it was not appropriate, and we frankly didn't want to ask the feds. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so we probably didn't want to ask the federal government for that money back because we didn't want to disclose our criminal activities. Also on page 9, sir, who wants to answer?
So again, I want to make sure that the process is clean.
Are you speaking to the intent of the people?
Let me talk about the drawdown.
Well, let me
how
ask the question, sir.
Sure.
Are you prepared to answer to the intent
No.
of the superintendent?
But I do want to go on.
Objection, Mr. Chair. This is not a courtroom.
Yes, correct.
When he did not request for the reimbursement?
Let me explain the process so that it's clear. So again, in the reimbursement, we aren't a third party. The third party is the gatekeepers to the federal funds.
Were you aware of this?
We, in the process of drawdown, the business office and my certifying officers are the officials who have to go ask for that money.
Okay.
So on the back end of the processing, local funds go in, the documents are provided, we go to the third party, we try to get access to the federal funds. At the time, it was Superintendent Fernandez. At the time of drawdown, you have to look at the legality, you have to look at the documentation. We didn't have that at the time, so we didn't draw down those funds.
Well, okay, that's fine, but I'm certain there will be agencies that are looking for those answers and to determine exactly how far this criminal activity goes. Also on page 9, sir, you mentioned that $1,511,984 in total overtime was paid to potentially exempt employees. Is that correct?
That was a finding in the single audit.
Okay.
As a result of their very limited testing,
Okay.
they said there was 17,000 that they could say was question costs, but they thought it could be as high as 1,500,000.
Okay.
When we did our audit, we could only find and account for 640,000 as question costs. We weren't able to figure out where the other 900,000 was.
Okay, and you adopted, at least for your report, an quotation from an independent auditor who stated, the total of overtime paid to potentially exempt employees during fiscal year 2021 is estimated to be $1,511,984. That's a direct quote.
That is a correct quote, yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Now,
But we were only able to document 640.
now when a body is attempting to prove a criminal action, they often look for intent. As you know, you were a lawyer and a judge for years. Management, according to you, also on page 9 of your audit, management knew of the problems at least before July 2020. Was that your finding? I'm sorry? You'll have to speak up. Was that your finding? If you'd like, I can quote from your report.
In April of 2021, they were aware that a group had been accumulating hours since April of 2020.
Okay, so since April of 2020, they knew that people were accumulating inappropriate overtime. Are you aware whether or not management did anything at that time to stop this theft of taxpayer money?
That didn't occur until later on, after the risk assessment was done in May or June of 2022.
So June of 22, although they had known of this since before July of 2020, management did nothing. Is that correct?
I think maybe it should be July. I think it maybe should be July 2021.
I'll take July of 2021. Management did nothing in the interim?
Management in September of 2021 approved the plan for the overtime and set a limit that it would be
30%.
okay as long as it did not exceed 30% of their annual salary.
Okay, well, let me jump around a little bit then. The 30% cap that you mentioned, I believe that the superintendent imposed the 30% cap at that time. Is it also true that the federal programs administrator, Mr. Santos, himself, who was exempt and not entitled to any overtime, nevertheless received more than 30% of his annual salary in overtime?
That was our finding, yes.
More than 30%.
That was our finding, yes.
Now, earlier I said that this gentleman received approximately $80,000 in overtime payment that he was not entitled to, correct?
That's our finding.
Okay. By the way, there's this concept of certification of funds. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, sir.
Could you explain it real quickly? What does that mean?
It means that the certifying officer, can attest to the fact that there is and has been an appropriation to the department for that purpose, and that there is adequate cash in the department to make the payment.
Is there a problem? Well, who was the certifying officer for these expenditures of overtime?
In every department, the director or the superintendent is the certifying officer,
Okay.
and that superintendent or director can delegate that responsibility to certain individual or individuals.
Now,
And in Department of Education, it was delegated to certain individuals.
Okay, were any of the individuals Mr. Santos?
That we know of, no.
No, so none of the certifying officers by the way, the delegation of authority, is that written or just oral?
It's written and it's logged in officially with the Department of Administration. So every government of Guam agency that has a certifying officer, they have to go through DOA. They actually come to us annually to ensure that, we're up to date with our certifying officers to ensure that, no one's resigned or
Okay.
whatnot.
So was Mr. Santos himself, did you see him on a delegation of authority?
No.
Okay, did you see, I don't know, maybe Mr. Fernandez didn't need it, but was he delegated the authority?
I think by statute he is already delegated or authorized to be the main certifying official. But then again, he also has the authority to delegate individuals. In this case, he delegated three people.
Okay, well, here's the $64,000 question. Who signed the certification for the overtime? Santos.
For the 4 signatures on there, it was the Federal Programs Administrator.
Okay, again, going for the gold here, who was the Federal Programs Administrator? Simple question. Yeah.
The redacted portions that we had.
Okay. Why are you reluctant to reveal the name?
It's a practice at the Office of Public Accountability that we do not
Perhaps you
list
could
names.
confirm my statement that that individual who signed on that was a Mr. Ike Santos. True or
Yes.
false? Yes? Okay, I think that's important that the taxpayers know that the person who authorized the payment of overtime was the very person who received the overtime. All right, thank you very much for that answer. You also stated that the Federal Programs Officer employees incurred overtime without a plan or approval, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and then 1 year, 1 year comes by and then they come up with the plan, right?
When it was presented to the superintendent in April of 2021, they had been accumulating all at that point 12 months of overtime.
Okay, is it good practice to just go ahead and kind of backfill and say that, well, I should have had the certification and the authorization, et cetera, and the plan in place to just come up with it after you've already, I guess, okayed the overtime?
That is not what the standard operating procedure for overtime is.
So if public auditor comes up to me and says, hey, you can't do that, you don't have a plan, I can't cure the sin by simply coming up with a plan to cover last year's overtime, correct?
I'm not sure. I mean,
Okay, I'm not sure if the term is either sandbagging or nunk-pro-tunking or what, but that appears to be what happened, and I think that...
Yeah, I'm not, if the people were eligible for it and should have, well, I'm not sure Department of Labor is going to say that you can't pay, that you can't pay them, but if, you know,
Right.
if they're eligible for it, they probably should have. If they're not, then it doesn't matter when you present it.
Mm-hmm, okay. Perhaps one of the most offensive things that you've uncovered is, and I will quote from this, this is from your report on page 12. It says, of the 59 employees that received overtime payments, 46 of them, they received their money, the money. 46 of them were ineligible, and 13 were eligible based on a circular, but payments to the ineligible employees totaled $628,904, or 98% of the total payments. As I understand that, there was just a host of people that were receiving overtime and were not entitled to it.
That is our finding, that is correct.
Now, the monies they received, just to beat this horse a little bit more, the monies they received, I suppose, came out of the taxpayer's pocket.
The initial payment had to come from the local appropriation.
Okay.
And it could be reimbursed, but for the fact that they realized that they could not ask for the reimbursement because it would not have been eligible for reimbursement.
Well, sir, just to use lay terms, I think an individual approaching this fresh-eyed would say that the federal programs administrator was on the grift. He was using that job for personal gain, is what it suggests. Now, you also said that certain of the, I guess, guidelines, federal, the ESF-1, SEA, which is the Education Stabilization Fund, the guidelines were misinterpreted, and you report that on page 14. Now, the guidelines states overtime and hazardous or differential pay would be allowable. It would be allowable to the extent that it is reasonable for the services rendered and conforms to the established written policy of the non-federal entity. The non-federal entity, of course, being Guam. In your opinion and from your investigation, and I know you've answered this, but did the Department of Education, in this case federal programs, did they abide by Guam rule and regulation as to awarding overtime?
Our findings was that they did not.
They did not.
Because they did not comply with that last part. It has to be the same for the Department of Education, the entity. It has to be the same for federal and non-federal employees.
Okay, all right. So they didn't follow the rules and regs that were required by the feds, and the feds were telling us to look at our own rules and regs, right? And they did neither.
Their claim is that if you read the first part, it says you can, but you have to also
follow the rules,
comply with the local. And if local says no, then our approval, US DOE's approval for use is also no. If it was in a state that had a different exempt listing,
right,
then they could.
So if Guam won't allow it, the feds aren't going to allow it, correct?
Pardon?
If Guam will not allow it, neither will the feds.
For this case?
Yes.
But as I understand their issue is, the feds said you can use it for overtime if your department has a policy and it's the same for federal employees and government employees.
Okay.
But this department did not.
Did not.
And so they could not.
Okay, so that would be one of the reasons that they didn't reclaim the $640,000, I assume.
You're correct.
Right, which is, frankly, from a lawyer's perspective, that is evidence of culpability. You also spoke about improper payments occurred due to an unauthorized certifier of funds. That would have been Mr. Santos, I assume. Is that
The
correct?
Federal Programs Administrator?
Yeah. Okay. Was there a conflict of interest between the Federal Programs Administrator approving the overtime and the fact that he received the overtime?
It was our finding that the fact that the Federal Programs Administrator signed in 4 different blocks as the requester, the approver, the certifier, and the federal programs person was a conflict. That was our finding.
All right, sir, I know that Senator Blas has got some questions here, so I'm going to kind of try and wrap it up pretty quick. You said on page 17 of your report that the superintendent approved 3 employees for overtime, and that exceeded the limit. And as of the date of the writing, the justification was not readily available. You noted that the Federal Programs Administrator, for, I assume these are fiscal years, 2020 and 2021, together received 36% of his salary in overtime. Is that correct?
That was our finding, yes.
I'm sorry?
That was our finding.
Okay, and then somebody that was a program coordinator for received $54,000, or excuse me, 54% of their salary, or excuse me, they received in overtime 54% of their salary.
That's correct. That was our finding.
Okay, and then somebody named a program coordinator 4 received 48%, correct?
That was our finding on that tag.
And is it also true that all of those were above the cap of 30%?
Yes, sir.
Okay, but they received it anyway. It was approved upon request? Okay. All
Yes.
right. That was a yes. Not yet. Soon. Okay. All right. It's getting. I know it's tiresome, and there are going to be plenty of fora in which these issues are going to be explored. That I can assure you. And when I was coming up with these questions, it was occurring to me that Senator Chris down there, he found a bunch of rats at Simon Sanchez. I think we found a rat in the federal programs. So on steroids, yeah. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I apologize if I was a little sharp in my questioning, but I intended to be. So.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. Senator Blas, do you have any questions?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. And I apologize for my tardiness. My wife, your employee, came home sick from school, so I had to make sure they fed her dinner before I got here. Okay, so. But it's interesting. I caught one of the things I caught, I guess, as I was watching on TV. Madam Speaker, okay, I know you as Speaker, so I'm going to call you as Speaker. Okay. You had mentioned Senator Lohan had earlier asked you about your appropriation, and you made a statement saying that I guess, was it your allotment or your appropriation woefully short, or is it your request for this year short? That was you, yeah. You're the pretty one next to Frank. It wasn't Frank.
So, yes, in the slides that we presented, we listed that our request was $274 million. And the actual appropriation from Public Law 36-107 was $220 million. Therefore, for 23, shortage is the request versus the appropriation is $53.9 million.
So about $53
Yes.
million. Interesting. Okay. Yes. Okay. Because I noticed here too, we got I guess these were some of the questions that were to be asked in the oversight, and I don't know if it was asked. It was? ¿Está, Malaza? I wasn't here. Okay. Okay. Pues I'm going to ask it again. You says, I guess as point 4 on the operations appropriation shortfall, during the EFSC meeting, GDOE reported a $15 million shortfall in personnel. Okay. Was that for this fiscal year or for, that's for this fiscal year? Pardon me?
The tool is projecting a shortfall
For this fiscal year?
for this fiscal year.
Frank, especially with Frank, this is becoming deja vu. You know where I'm coming, you know where I'm getting at,
Yes,
right here,
yes,
Frank?
yes, yes.
Okay, I think so. It's
I understand, Senator, yes.
Yeah, yes.
We're
okay.
working on it.
Okay, so I can tell you the 4 words that I told you that I was going to tell you. I told you so. Okay, I told you so in this thing. But let's go back to that, and so that we can, you know, the beautiful woman sitting to your right over here, she can understand why you and I were talking in code. Because, Madam Superintendent, when we were discussing, I guess, the teacher pay raise at the time and where that money had initially come from to pay the initial pay raise from May to the end of the fiscal year for 2022, okay, it was presented that that money came from the AARP funds, but don't worry about it, we can cover that. It's $21 million short, but don't worry, we can cover it. And now we have a $15 million shortfall. Okay?
Please explain that, Frank.
Please.
I'm sorry, Senator. It's, again, on the EFS, we're using current object class categories set aside for a budget to project where we will end the year. So there is a projection. Is it a shortfall? No. And just to go full circle with this conversation, certifying officers, how we operate, an appropriation is given to us.
Sure.
That appropriation is given to us in however amount deemed necessary to run operations from the legislature. Let's just go blanket 230. If it's given to us to 230, we line item that appropriation. Certifying officers will keep us within the appropriation. So our audit at the end of the year will tell you if you're deficit spending. The
Okay.
last 2 years, we haven't been deficit spending. Right now, we're projecting a shortfall, but if we're currently going through our using the tools, using the EFSC, financial monitoring, we should not end. I don't think that I can tell you in good conscience that we're not going to end in a $15 million deficit for payroll.
Thank God that we got.
I'm telling you that now. Yeah.
Thank God that we got over $400 million in federal stimulus funds, right, to be able to cover this, right? Because we can have that conversation now because of the existence of that. I tell you what, I appreciate, because the oversight chair at that point in time had the same concern.
I know we're joking, but you're absolutely right. Thank God we do have it.
I just want to make sure is that it wasn't this body, it wasn't the oversight chair that created the shortfall. It was basically the commitment and the assurances that we got from GDOE that don't worry, we'll cover it. But now we're looking at something else here, okay? Along those lines, first off, I want to get back to, because there's a whole discussion about the overtime, and I guess my question is in this whole discussion of the overtime, okay, and I'm sure, we're innocent until proven guilty, but in this discussion about this overtime, what funding source was initially supposed to be used to pay that?
What it is that we always use local funds first.
Right, but what did you want?
And then we would submit the documents and to go to a third-party fiduciary
Okay.
agent then to try to get reimbursement.
So what was the thought process as to where that money was going to come from?
The intent was never to use local funds, I believe. The intent was always to use those federal grants, which is why they went to USAID for guidance on allowability.
Oh, so it was ESF?
It was a combination of both, I believe.
With a combination of what?
Of ESF, and I believe there was some ARP, but I can verify that. I believe it was ESF to start
So
with.
ESF and ARP, but there was. Okay, great, because then, correct me if I'm wrong, anytime that you're awarded these monies, immediately after the award or in the application for this award, for this game, you have to submit a spend plan. You have to submit a plan as to how this money was going to be spent, right? Was, in the initial plan, was there any discussion about using this for overtime? In the initial submission of the plan?
I'm sorry, Senator, I'll have somebody else. I wasn't part of the submission of a plan or aware of a plan that was submitted, so I'll have somebody else.
Now, Frank, we're going to use that excuse again that you weren't around at the time, Mr.?
No, I don't know if they can confirm whether or not a plan was
Okay.
submitted to. Yeah.
Okay, so ma'am, can you identify?
Good evening. My name is Doris Pukikosa, and I'm a project lead with the ESCL, or Educational Support and Community Learning Division.
Okay.
So to answer your question, the initial ESF2 application or plan did include overtime for identified personnel. ESF2, so the Educational Stabilization Fund.
What about the ARP fund?
The ARP also included for year 2, because again, it's by year, right?
Yeah.
So the ESF2 was the first year, and the ARP also had overtime pay included in the plan.
Okay, but in that overtime pay, did you have to specify for what work that is anticipated?
Yes.
So in this now, this whole discussion about this illegal overtime, was that part of the initial request, or?
Yes, so as both the superintendent and our deputy here, Mr. Cooper Nurse, indicated, we had reached out to US Ed for permission or authorization. They provided it, granted, as OPA indicated in their report. It was not consistent, and unfortunately, through miscommunication, and I'm not giving out too much information because of investigations, the understanding was it was allowable and approved. I cannot speak to anything that happened thereafter because those are all part of processes that are above my level.
Okay. Do you have that in writing?
As far as...
What the initial plan or the initial request when you turned in all
Yes.
that paper? You do?
Yes, it is part of what is shown as the approved application.
Okay.
And there have been subsequent revisions, and those revisions are
And you
also-
have all of that documentation?
Yes, it's actually what is loaded, or
It's kind of interesting because when I asked for that documentation, when they called for the teacher pay and the ARP, there was nothing.
so in the initial plan, again, for the teacher pay,
Right.
that was a subsequent request turned in by our then Superintendent Fernandez. He got special permission to use some of the funds specifically for that purpose.
So where's that paperwork?
I believe that was an email and a memo sent directly. I don't have it in front of me, but I believe that that can be made available.
Can it be now, finally?
So that was sent by the superintendent at that time, getting permission to use the ARP funds to
Yeah,
pay
but
for
I
the
was
teacher pay.
asking for that, for that email. And I was told it doesn't exist.
If you could just get it, Frank, and then we'll wrap it up on that part. Frank, just get the memo so that everybody, all my committee will get a copy
I will
of it.
get what I can, Senator.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, continue.
Okay,
Senator
so let me move on to the next question. There was a discussion earlier about ARP hires, or that you also hired, I guess, some individuals with the ARP funds. Okay, right? Mr. Sanchez?
I'm sorry, I was speaking
There
to my
was
boss.
there were employees that were hired with the ARP funds.
Yes.
Okay, that continue to exist today. What are
Yes.
those? What are
So I
those
don't know the
positions?
exact numbers, but we have a couple of program coordinators who are providing staffing support to the different federal programs, curriculum and instruction, facilities and maintenance. And I'm not sure who the others are.
So it's primarily administrative staff, or?
No. The majority, large majority, is either the community program aides, and we were talking about that earlier, as well as teacher assistants. So we have about 200 of some of those employees that are out at the schools. That was a direct result of the schools asking for additional support for staff, because at the time for COVID, when students came back, and even when students were partial online, modes of learning and stuff like that, schools needed assistance with staffing. So
Wait,
we were
So-
able to pick up these employees to help
So
with that.
when your teachers were teaching online, and there was no kids in the school, you hired staff to work in the school?
It was after. So once they started to return to school, that's when they needed staff. So we anticipated the return for school.
Okay.
And they were hired somewhere about maybe the summer before we returned to face-to-face.
Do you have a listing of those those positions? I don't need the names of the
Oh,
employees.
yeah.
You do?
Yeah, I think.
You'll be able to give it to us?
Yeah, I think those were provided. I'll
Okay.
double check to make sure.
You know, along with the costs and everything?
Yes.
Next question I have is,
Yeah.
Senator,
those-
we did send that list down to the legislature, but we can provide that as well.
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So, did these same employees that you hired also get the bonus pay that you passed out with the teacher pay?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Not 22%, the pay that they
You're
got
talking about
last
the-
year other than the teacher pay. Your teachers got the
Yeah,
20%.
I don't know if they did.
That's the other thing, teachers got 20%, a regular employee got 22%. I'm sure that you've been asked about whether or not you're going to get the 2%. Anyway, so
Yes,
those employees.
I don't know. I have to check with when Frank
The
comes back.
ones who got I guess the $5,000, right? How much did they get as far as bonus? 5,000, 10,000, how much
So
was
I'm going to have to wait for Deputy
It's
Finance to answer the finance.
5,000.
5,000.
So did some of those individuals that you hired with the ARP funding also get the $5,000 bonus?
I gotta ask Franklin.
Yeah, we have to wait for Frank. I'm not sure if they did.
Yes, they did?
Yes, they
Yeah.
did.
And that 5,000 bonus,
Doris, let Frank answer that.
that 5,000 bonus came from
We
local
want to
funds?
make sure we're correct. Yeah.
The monies used for the 5,000 came from local funds?
No, from ARP.
ARP. So we double paid them?
No, I mean, their regular salary out of ARP, and the 5,000 retention was from ARP as well.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just, I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, I'm just,
Deputy Finance
rapid fire here
responds to
because
that.
I know that, the oversight chair wants to wrap this thing up, so I'm trying to go through this as fast as we can.
Sure.
Okay? So one of the couple of things that I want to take away, okay, is I guess, finally, I guess there is that memo that exists by email, on the initial request of how we were going to spend the ARP fund, and then the supplemental request to use that fund for teacher pay. That email does exist.
Yes.
Okay, and I'd like to be able to get a copy of that, okay? So I can see this, okay? By the way, did we manage to go back to the U.S. Department of Ed and tell them, oops, we're sorry, we used the 1984 law that no longer exists to justify our teachers' pay? Did you guys realize that?
Well, again.
In the
I can't answer
justification that I got from you guys, there was the utilization of a 1984 law. Yeah, no, I'm dead.
Yeah.
So just so you know, okay? Because Senator Santos, Francis Santos, when she was sitting in your seat, had the same, what the hell look on his face. Okay? Yeah.
that. Sorry, it has to do with the bonus pay.
Okay, because I'm sure that when this thing gets audited, we want to make sure our I's are crossed. Our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed. And if we had used the 1984 law, which in fact said that it was the civil service that was supposed to give you guys the teacher's pay raise, and not the governor of Guam, okay, I think you should correct that, okay, before you get dinged for it, okay. So, and then the other one that I want to be able to get is the positions and the pay for those that received the overtime. Let me go back to when just the chronology of events with regards to the overtime. They first started to accumulate it in April of 2020, right? Yes? Okay. Okay.
Can you direct that question to the auditor, the public auditor?
Public auditor, I'm sorry. Mr. Other Speaker, okay? Mr. Other Speaker, if you can come, I'm just going over so that I can understand the chronology of events here. It was in April of 2020 that the overtime was first starting to become accumulated by these employees?
As we understand it, yes.
Okay. Then it was on April of 2021 when the superintendent was informed of possibly some concern, or
No, that was in July of 2020.
July of 2020. So what was the April 21 date for?
That's when they started accumulating, banking their
No,
hours.
20.
No, they started doing that at 20. If you can, we can take a break and go back to the YouTube channel and listen to what you had told me. The plan was submitted in July.
No, you'll find it on page 9 on the OPA report. It talks about that
So what was in April of 20?
however, it was not until April 2021 that CNI and FBD submitted plans for the overtime work for 11 months.
Yeah.
They were
was
trying to
when
go
they
back in
presented-
time.
That was when they initially presented it to the superintendent.
Do you understand in that submission of the plan whether there was also at that time the request or that that plan was going to be retroactive?
I don't recall that.
Okay. Because I don't think that even statutorily we can apply that, can we? In the principles of accounting, when you're starting to ask this, Mr. Cooper-Nurse, can it be applied in that fashion, retroactively?
I'm sorry?
As far as your experience?
As an auditor, no.
Okay, okay. So it was very safe to assume that even if the plan was approved and submitted at the time that it was submitted, at least the request, that everything that happened prior to that, there was no permission for.
In general practice, what will happen, yeah, you're correct. So generally, as OPA indicated, is a plan has to have a certifying official, and it has to be approved, and it has to be approved prior to work.
Right.
The plan and the OT plan serves as a planning document setting the superintendent's approval and providing funding for a future date of occurrence. From there, the SOP requires the internal controls to be at the division level because the plan is not the pay doc. The pay doc is a timesheet.
Okay. Okay. So then is it safe to assume then that based on that, then it's the government of Guam, the local fund, the general fund, us, the tax people, the taxpayer, the people of Guam, that would have to be able to make up for that funding that was lost or that was paid out on unauthorized overtime from April of 2020 to about July of 2021.
Yes, we are having to assume that.
Yes, okay. And that figure, sir, based on what you can ascertain, is at least about $670,000?
640.
640 but it could be up to an amount of how much? You said that you could not be able to?
The external auditor thought that it could go up to 1.5, but we weren't
1.5.
able to. What we were able to find was only 640.
Right. So the 640 was what was actually paid out.
Right.
And as indicated earlier by the acting deputy superintendent, there is still some overtime that is outstanding that has not been entered into the system. And only when that happens, they could identify the total amount. So I think the auditors, the external auditors, when they came up with that figure, that's what they estimated the entire amount to be.
Okay. Now, here's going to be an interesting question. Let's say that I am an employee that has got nothing to do with any of the signature boxes, okay, and I was ordered to work the overtime. But now we find that that overtime was unauthorized. What remedy then do we have for that employee who is following what at that time is assumed to be a lawful order, expects payment, but because the overtime, or at least that expense was not approved, practice wasn't approved, it's clearly not the employee's fault. Can that employee expect that payment? Should, right?
Yes.
So then that could conceivably then bring this figure if, Vince, what you're saying is that while it has been already worked, it's already been recorded, been submitted, it hasn't been recorded, and it hasn't been paid, but there's still going to be that obligation to pay the employee. So therefore, it could go in excess of over $1 million, right?
In our audits, we try to just go with the number that we have. There is no projection like in the financial audit of a possibility. And so all that we can speak to is the 640.
Right, I understand. Okay, but I just need for us to recognize that because now you've got an employee who was told to work, did work, did earn the hours, has an expectation of paying, that money is going to have to come from somewhere to pay him. And if we're already $15 million short, I told you so. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ross.
One more.
Okay, one more, but I'm just thankful that everybody here is not entitled to overtime. So, Senator Lohan.
One more. Yeah. To the this will be it. Yeah, to the OPA. Earlier, you had said in the disparity and the folks that were qualified to receive the overtime versus not. What is the disparity between the ones that qualified to get the overtime versus the ones who weren't?
No, so I guess when we're talking about the disparity, there were actually two different compensation mechanisms.
Yes.
One was the executive order that offered differential pay, the 10, 15, 25%.
Okay.
And then you had the overtime. So it's basically, that's where the disparity was.
Okay.
You had some employees who we would consider, right, the frontline workers, the nurses, the social workers, and even some administrators and certain personnel that are at the school that were giving the grab and go and stuff like that.
Okay.
They were they availed of the 15%, 25%, versus the other division where they were able to get 1.5 times their salary.
1.5
150%.
Okay, and you had said that the disparity was you had the frontline workers basically that based on the executive order, right? I mean the frontline workers, but and they were the ones handing out the food and things like that. Now the ones that got the 1.5 of their salary, what were they doing?
Well, from our understanding, working from home.
Working from home?
Right. That's from what we were...
working from home?
Yeah.
And while the frontline... Okay. Overtime from home?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So, let me ask one more time to make sure I got it because it's kind of late, right? So...
Yeah, we've been there since 7:45.
No, I know.
7:45
just so we're again, we're make sure that we're corrected this. So the disparity, the ones that got 1.5 over their salary, that got the overtime, they were working from home, correct?
I don't think that we really should say that. We can't document that. All we know is they submitted, we can say that they submitted timesheets. We can't speak to what they did because I don't think we can.
Okay, but we already heard that they're working from home. But anyway, that being said, the frontline workers, the ones that were authorized through executive order and all that, they were the frontline folks. They were the frontline folks handing out food, exposure to COVID, and all that. So they were actually working. We got the documentation on where those employees, we got documentations on where they're at, right? Where they were at, what they were doing, and accounting for their times, right? Is that correct?
And the rest of them, these would probably say that they were preparing some things. I really don't know. They were getting things.
Yeah, no. But I mean, they at least they were documented that they had, I guess, a supervisor that knew that they were there physically doing some things, right? Whereas the others, their time sheet was just turned in and you don't know where they're working from. pretty much. I see a nod. Anyway. That's all right. It's getting late, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. You know, Madam Superintendent and Deputy, and the Vice Chair. I did speak with your Oversight Chair. We will be communicating with you and taking a look at the governing board versus policy. And on the note that Senator Bras brought up about the civil service, supposed to do the pay raise, I remember the Vice Chair was on the board when I was there. I was the chair, and I pursued the civil service to do it, and the superintendent at the time was Louis Reyes. That's when the teachers got their pay raise. They got 3%. I think it was 3.5. And you were the speaker at the time, Madam Superintendent. Moving along, we're going to wrap this up. I gave you a list. Please return the list with answers specifically, because I want to be able to share this with my colleagues. So then they know specifically the answers, and then they'll be able to work with it. Because, you know, your budget is coming up. I already spoke to the Oversight Chair. He's going to be meeting with me. And I hope that the people of Guam that are watching and my colleagues that attended tonight gain some information. Because that was the intent of this oversight. It wasn't to drag anybody through the mud. It was to get information. Maybe some information was revealed that shouldn't have been revealed, but that's okay. The prerogative of the people's house. But with that, there's no one else to present any other testimony. I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. No more. They said Tom has one more. I said no more. Thank you for attending this hearing and providing feedback and suggestions. Please provide that information. And that the GDOE oversight hearing is now adjourned. The time now is 8:30. Si Zeus Marcia, and thank you, and please be safe.